Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for tonight. I want to declare open the meeting of the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Legislation Committee. And I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet tonight and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Now, as you know, the Senate has referred to the committee the particulars of the proposed expenditure for the year 24-25 and other related documents for the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade portfolios. The committee may also examine the annual reports of the departments and agencies appearing before it. The committee has set the 12th of August this year as the date for the return of answers to questions taken on notice, and the committee has set the 9th of July this year as the deadline for senators to submit any written questions on notice. The committee is due to report to the Senate on Friday the 12th of July 2024. Under Standing Order 26, the committee must take all evidence in public session, and this includes answers to questions on notice. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It's unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as contempt. It is also contempt to give false or misleading evidence to the committee. The Senate, by resolution in 1999, endorsed the following test of relevance of questions at estimates hearings. Any questions going to the operations or financial positions of the departments and agencies which are seeking funds in the estimates are relevant questions for the purposes of estimates hearings. I further remind officers that the Senate has resolved that there are no areas in connection with the expenditure of public funds where any person has a discretion to withhold details or explanations from the Parliament or its committees unless the Parliament has expressly provided otherwise. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions to a superior officer or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. I draw the attention of witnesses to an order of the Senate of the 13th of May 2009 specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised and which I now incorporate into the Hansard. Witnesses are specifically reminded that a statement claiming that information or a document is confidential or consists of advice to government is not a statement that meets the requirements of the 2009 order. Instead, witnesses are required to provide some specific indication of the harm to the public interest that could result from the disclosure of the information or the document. An officer called upon for the first time to answer a question should state their full name and the position for the Hansard, and witnesses should speak clearly into the microphone. And just a reminder, please, if you have any mobile phones, make sure they're off or put on silent. I remind senators and witnesses in the hearing room that microphones remain live unless I instruct otherwise. For witnesses participating by video conference, which I don't believe there's none, so we can move on from that one, I remind all senators that we continue our work implementing the Set the Standard report, and as the Chair I'm going to ensure that proceedings are conducted in an orderly, respectful and courteous way. I ask members of the media to follow the established media guidelines and instructions from the committee secretariat. And if there's anyone in the gallery this evening, a reminder you're not permitted to speak or interfere with the proceedings or with witnesses at any point during the hearing. Witnesses and senators who are seeking to table documents during the committee's hearing tonight are requested to provide an electronic copy, if you can, of those documents to the Secretariat so they can be easily circulated to senators as well as to the witnesses. Now, today's committee proceedings commence with the representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and they'll be the only witness before us tonight up until 10 o'clock. And I want to say thank you again to the Department for appearing this evening. I'd like to welcome the Minister, Senator the Honourable Jenny McAllister, who is representing the Minister for Veterans Affairs, and Ms Alison Frame, the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, Minister or Secretary, do either of you have an opening statement?
I don't, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
I do, Chair.
Thank you so much, Secretary. Secretary, I'm happy to give you the call and then we'll go to questions from senators.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Chair and Senators. I wish to make a brief statement to update the committee on key areas of progress since the February Senate estimates. As the committee would be aware, the last of the unallocated claims backlog was cleared at the end of February, ahead of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide's 31 March 2024 deadline. Of the 41,800 claims in the backlog originally identified in the Royal Commission's interim report, all have been allocated, with well over 90% now finalised. As at 31 May 2024, DVA had 73,204 claims being actively processed and a further 3,003 claims awaiting allocation. In May, DVA made a record 9,976 determinations. These numbers demonstrate that we are continuing to increase the rate at which claims are processed. And I can also report the average time it takes to process some claims continues to trend downward. As at 31 May 2024, more than half of all claims we had on hand had been received within the last 200 days, and around one-third were received in the last 100 days. While this highlights our commitment to process claims swiftly, I do appreciate that many veterans are still waiting for their long-standing claims to be determined, and we continue to prioritise these older claims. For MERCA initial liability claims received from 1 December 2023, which accounts for over half of new claims, and determined by 31 May 2024, the average time taken to process was 52 days, and on average these claims were allocated for processing within 7 days of receipt. In the recent May budget, the department was allocated an additional $186 million over 4 years from 24-25 to support the processing of claims and downstream service impacts, of which nearly $21 million a year ongoing is to fund an additional 141 permanent service delivery staff. This is on top of the 500 ASL ongoing announced in the October 22-23 budget. As a result, determination rates are now at record levels. The 9,976 determinations made in May represents a 35% increase on May last year, when 7,412 determinations were made. Our delegates' productivity has also increased, reaching a record average of 29.7 claims per trained delegate in May 2024, up from 22.2 in May 2023. As more staff are trained and brought online and we continue to look for efficiencies through business improvement, we anticipate processing times will continue to reduce, which ultimately means getting much needed to support to veterans quicker. Another key priority, which will also help reduce processing times, has been to simplify the Veterans' Entitlements, Compensation and Rehabilitation legislation. The department has undertaken several consultation rounds to engage with the veteran community and ensure the final legislation meets their needs. The budget provides $222 million to see this important work completed, with the draft legislation due to be introduced to Parliament imminently. We are also looking to engage and support the veteran community in different ways to assist in the preparation and lodgement of claims. In Western Australia, we have commenced a new program called the Claims Lodgement Assistance Program, where experienced DVA claims processing staff work alongside ex-service organisation advocates to support veterans to lodge their claims. This program is focused on assisting veterans by smoothing the claims process, reducing unnecessary delays and minimising stress and frustration for clients. The program was launched in late February 2024 and currently involves RSL WA and the WA branch of the Australian Special Air Service Association. So far, our staff have supported veterans to lodge over 300 conditions and provided on-site support for advocates. This month, the program is being expanded to the Air Force Association, and we are looking to include a regional location such as Busselton RSL, as well as other regional locations. The program is about getting our staff on the ground in the community, sitting alongside veterans and their advocates, hearing their needs directly and working towards the shared goal of getting them the best support available. DVA is looking to expand the program nationally in the coming months. We are also in the final stages of reviewing and consolidating the forms used by medical practitioners that assess veterans in support of their claims. Stages 1 to 5 have seen our forms reduced from 116 to 44. Consultation has been finalised on the 6th and final package, and this will result in 94 forms reducing to 40. Overall, this will see our forms reduced from 210 forms to 84. Another example of the work DVA is doing to improve outcomes for veterans is with our partners in Tasmania to better identify veterans and refer them to Open Arms services. The intent is to reach members of the veteran community not previously known to DVA, but who could benefit from Open Arms services. The initiative has introduced a question to identify veterans in the state-based mental health intake service and through the national implementation of the Central Intake and Referral Service. This will then allow veterans to be referred to Open Arms from people calling this service, including GPs and veterans. This initiative has commenced in Tasmania, and it is our intention to implement this progressively in other jurisdictions. Additionally, gaps in mental health services for veterans in Tasmania are being addressed by Open Arms commencing the delivery of a post-traumatic stress disorder treatment and recovery program for veterans and families. This program commenced in May 2024. These new approaches build on a strong foundation of existing engagements and create better mental health outcomes for the veteran community. As part of these ongoing efforts to build trauma-informed work practices that are relevant and responsive to the unique service experiences of service, we have created a Chief Psychiatrist role within the department. Dr. John Lane has commenced acting in this role, and he will report directly to me and work alongside our Chief Health Officer. In this role, Dr. Lane will provide the department and our clients dedicated psychiatric expertise to support clinical governance across programs and policies, with a special focus on our mental and social health programs. Dr. Lane brings a unique perspective to the role, having served with the Australian Army for 10 years before undertaking a medical degree. He's since worked on deployment with the United States Mental Health Team in Kandahar, Afghanistan, as the first Australian Defence Force psychiatrist embedded with US forces, and has been a senior lecturer in psychiatry at the University of Tasmania. Dr. Lane brings an abundance of knowledge on the specific challenges veterans face, and I look forward to working with him and to what his expert advice can bring to the Australian veteran community through this new role. Recently, we also launched our successful community consultations town halls. These virtual events, led by a Deputy Secretary, provide any interested veteran community stakeholders with updates on significant topics for the veteran community. For the Female Veterans Forum held in May, the department piloted an open expression of interest process with the broader veteran and family community to identify women interested in participating in this forum. As a result, 60% of the forum participants were new to the event, and most had not previously engaged with DVA in a participatory event of this nature. We will continue to advance these types of initiatives. As part of our expanded engagement approach, we will also involve the veteran community in the delivery of our Anzac Day services in Türkiye and France. This year, 2 Gallipoli scholars joined the DVA team to deliver our successful Gallipoli program. Next year, we intend to significantly increase the involvement of veterans and family members, and will soon begin work with ESOs and the veteran community to seek nominees for the DVA commemorations team. These are just some examples of the work we're doing, not only to improve processing times, but to rebuild trust in the veteran community and service providers who work with veterans. These programs are about looking how we can do things differently to achieve better outcomes. Before I close, I would like to note that I have submitted a letter to the committee providing updated information on the now ended MATES program. I hope this information is of assistance, and I welcome any further questions the committee may have. As always, I would like to acknowledge all our staff working across the country to support veterans and their families. I have met staff in many of our national and regional offices, and I'm always met with a genuine dedication and determination to support Australia's veteran community. Everything we achieve as a department for veterans and their families in Australia is a direct result of their efforts. Thank you.
Secretary, thank you very much for that comprehensive response. I'm sure anyone watching tonight would be appreciating the work that you have done since coming as Secretary and your team, particularly with respect to also reducing the backlog. And I think, there are a lot of veterans out there tonight who'd be very appreciative of the efforts that your department's been doing. And, it's been an impressive work considering that your predecessor at a previous estimates hearing said that DVA would never be able to eliminate that backlog. And I guess one question quickly before I hand over to Senator Davey would be how have you managed to achieve that in such a very short time frame?
Senator, the differentiating factor there has been the additional resources that have been provided to the department. They were funded initially in the October 2022 budget, and they have continued to be funded in subsequent budgets, and that has enabled the department to process claims, obviously, at a faster rate with more delegates and more claim support officers. We've also, as I've referred to in the opening statement, implemented some business improvement processes around that as well. We've received funding for some enhancements to ICT systems and other aspects of the claims processing system. So the additional resources have been well directed, Senator, and are manifest in those numbers that I was able to share this evening.
Yeah. Well, I might come back to a bit later on, but anyway, you should be commended for the work that you and your team have been doing. So well done. Now, Senator Davey, you've got the call to kick us off tonight.
Thank you very much, and I will come to your opening statement a bit later, but I do want to ask about something that is increasingly topical, but when it first was raised through the questions on notice to the Environment Minister due to the National Heritage List and Commonwealth Heritage List that was raised in February this year. As the Department of Veterans Affairs, however, you do have responsibility for meaningful commemorative activity and also commemorative sites. But then I acknowledge they're also on the National Heritage List. But given that most of our meaningful commemorative activities are around days and activities where people congregate around war memorials, be they along Anzac Avenue in Canberra, or be they Martin Place in Sydney, or Deniliquin around Anzac Day ceremonies, Vietnam Veterans Days, etc. Have you asked any questions about or undertaken a review into the security of our war memorials and the increasing prevalence of vandalism at these sites?
Senator, the Australian War Memorial and many of the other memorials on Anzac Avenue are not within the purview of the Department of Veterans Affairs because they are overseen directly by the War Memorial. There are other memorials, as you're referring to there, that in Martin Place and others I know have been in the news of late. They are not any memorials that are managed, or the maintenance is managed by the Department of Veterans Affairs. They're managed respectively by state governments. I think RSLs have some direct oversight of some. I'll ask Deputy Secretary McLaren may have some further information.
Alison McLaren, Deputy Secretary, Veteran, Family and Stakeholder Experience. Senator, the majority of memorials are under the custodianship of either state governments, local governments or community organisations such as the RSL. That obviously vandalism is something that we all take seriously, but it is well outside the remit of the Department of Veterans Affairs. State and territory and local governments do work closely with the police in their various jurisdictions to do what they can to protect those.
Does the department hold concerns or conduct any surveys or reviews about the impact such vandalism has on the mental health of our veterans and their response to it that may add to particularly veterans who are have post-traumatic stress disorder when they see this sort of defacement of memorials that have been erected to recognise their service?
So that I'm not aware of any surveys that have been undertaken, Senator, but all of those organisations that are responsible do take it very seriously, and any act of vandalism is rectified as quickly as possible, recognising that it does have a significant impact on our community, and we absolutely condemn that vandalism in the strongest terms.
But because the actual physical sites are managed by other agencies and organisations, and in some cases the states, you wouldn't be aware of the how many actions have been taken where they've actually identified the vandals, taken action and applied penalties?
No, we're not notified of any of those actions, Senator.
Okay. For this block, I'm happy to cede the rest of my time to my colleague.
That was quick. Yeah, sure. Yep. No worries.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Secretary, hello. And I don't think I've had the opportunity to congratulate you since your appointment, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And very, very good statement, and particularly I think the appointment of Dr. Lane. So that's not what I want to ask you questions about. I actually wanted to come to page 13 of the PBS in relation to the strategic statement that references compensation processing times. So, first of all, under the draft Veterans Entitlement Treatment and Support Simplification and Harmonisation Bill, my first question is there any mechanism that would allow DVA to consider compensation for economic loss based on the untested word of a veteran, and how is that tested?
Senator, I have Mr Brown here, who
That's
has
why I
been
figured
leading
that was the case.
all
Thank you.
the consultations on this legislation. He will be able to answer any questions, I dare say.
Thank you.
This chair's extremely high. Luke Brown, First Assistant Secretary, Policy Division. Senator, the bill you're referring to would shift all claims for compensation lodged on or after 1 July 2026 into the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Act of 2004.
Yep.
That Act already provides for economic loss compensation in the form of incapacity payments. Mm-hmm. Those incapacity payments are essentially calculated as post-discharge, pre-injury normal earnings minus any actual earnings that the veteran might receive from work they're able to undertake post-injury. In terms of the caveat on your question, generally to access incapacity payments, the Commission will have had to have accepted a claim for liability for the injury or disease which is causing the incapacity. The bill does propose some new tests that currently aren't contained within the MERCA in order to establish liability. So generally we establish liability on the basis of causation, that is, that service has to have related to the claimed injury or disease. Mm-hmm. But the bill will introduce new provisions which will allow the Commission to determine an instrument, which would be a presumptive liability instrument.
Can you say that again? Determine, I missed what you said.
Determine a legislative instrument, which would be a presumptive liability instrument, which would essentially allow the Commission to determine a category of employment in the ADF, an exposure, an activity, and then conditions that are known to be commonly linked to those activities in the ADF. And in those cases, the requirement that the Commission investigate elements of causation in relation to the claim would be alleviated, in that they could just presume that the ADF service has caused that injury or disease that's being claimed.
Okay, so can you just unpack that further? So it makes proving causation easier by having categories of employment and then the standard types of, or the most common types of injuries that occur in that employment. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this would actually sort of reify in legislation policy positions that we already have in relation to what we call decision-ready conditions. So the Department currently has 83 decision-ready conditions, about 40 primary conditions and 43 sequela conditions. But these are set in policy settings under a regime that we call our Statements of Principles regime at the moment, which are instruments determined by the Repatriation Medical Authority, which contain factors which outlines the sorts of activities or exposures that can cause certain injuries. And the Commission at the moment has to investigate and establish evidence as to whether those factors have been met. We are working around those Statements of Principles at the moment to put in place these presumptive liability arrangements in policy, but the bill itself will allow for these to be actually, as I say, made concrete in legislation. There are also other sort of legacy...
So can you just explain, for what you've just described, what will be in legislation and then what will be in regulations? So
in legislation, there will be a power for the Repatriation Commission, it will be, because we're merging the two commissions, but it'll be the Repatriation Commission to determine an instrument, and that instrument will allow them to accept liability on a presumptive basis, so that will be in the legislation. And then subsequent to that, there will be an initial instrument made, which will contain 83 decision-ready conditions that we currently have, Also, some legacy arrangements we have for Point Cook firefighters and DSEAL reseal workers under the Safety, Rehabilitation and Compensation Defence-Related Claims Act of 1988. So that'll be the initial instrument, and then government and the commissions will be able to expand that from that point on.
Okay. So that will presumably speed up that part of the process, because you'll have those 83 there that will make that part faster. But then what will a veteran have to demonstrate? So presumably they can't just come in and say, well, I was, in artillery and I think I've got hearing loss, industrial deafness, or, whatever. They still have to go through and prove it, provide medical evidence of that?
They'll have to provide a diagnosis.
Okay.
Yep. And there'll have to be some evidence that they had the service category that corresponds with the presumptive condition. That'll be usually established on their personnel files.
So in terms of damage, so in terms of injury that's been diagnosed and has gone through this process, how do you then determine under the new bill economic loss or any other form of compensation?
So it'll be essentially the way it's been established under the MERC for the last 20 years. Which
so that's not changing?
No.
Okay. Can you unpack a bit for us what that is?
So there's many forms of compensation under the MERC. You're particularly interested in economic loss.
Yes.
So essentially, the process there is a medical certificate which indicates that the veteran is incapacitated for service or work due to the condition for which liability has been accepted. We then take what their normal earnings were prior to that injury and subtract any actual earnings that they may be receiving, and they receive 100% of that for the first 45 weeks of that incapacity, and then post that 45 weeks there's a step down, and the minimum step down is 75%, but that scales up depending on how many hours a week that they're working.
So will the permanent impairment table, can you just clarify that, will still be used?
So permanent impairment's non-economic loss compensation,
No,
so I'm not
but
talking...
I've moved on.
Yeah, so permanent impairment, the process will, just trying to think if there will be a change to the date of effect under the bill. That was part of the exposure draft that we put out for consultation. There is a change to the beneficial change to the date of effect for permanent impairment payments. They start as a fortnightly or a periodic payment under the MERCA, but they can be converted wholly or partly to a lump sum compensation payment. The date of effect for permanent impairment at the moment is the latter of the date the claim for liability was made for the condition which resulted in the permanent impairment, or the date the condition became permanent and stable. We're moving that back. But the question you're asking about the impairment assessment tables, we'll still use what's known as GARP to assess permanent impairment.
And so what sort of ranges can people get paid out? What are the sort of payments under these impairment tables? Are you able to provide that notice, sort of what they are?
Are you looking for monetary amounts?
Monetary values, yes.
Yeah, it depends. I've probably got the maximum weekly rate in
Yes,
mind.
please.
Yeah. Just give me a second then, Senator. It was indexed today as well, so I don't know.
They're called PI. Are they PI points?
So PI points, impairment points, are on a rating from 1 to 100.
Yep.
Assessed using GARP, but the maximum kicks in at 80 impairment points, and then there's a lifestyle rating as well that's used to calculate so the maximum weekly permanent impairment payment as of today, yesterday, 1 July 2024, was $421.72. So that's the maximum weekly amount. Senator.
Per week, and that's the 18...
That's at 80 impairment points.
Yep. Okay. So just on this set of questions, so might seem a bit of a question statement of the obvious, but why is it important from DVA's perspective to refer somebody to a medical practitioner to get a diagnosis, a formal diagnosis?
Because the legislation requires that the person be suffering from an injury or disease, and we need to confirm that they are, within the meaning of the Act, suffering from an injury or disease, and then that diagnosis needs to correspond with the statement of principle that we're applying to establish causation.
Thank you. Now, can I come to question on notice 452, which was actually in the House of Reps, where the member for New England asked, for the past 10 years, how many veterans who sustained injuries in active service received at least or over $2 million in one-off compensation payments for injuries? Now, on the 2nd of February 2024, the department answered nil. Is that still the case?
As far as I know, Senator, I would clarify that question says one-off. So there are obviously some acts, as you know, enable cumulative payments,
Yes.
and payments can, add over time. But the question was answered
Yes.
accurately in terms of one-off payments over $2 million.
So in terms of then cumulative payments, are there any cases of cumulative payments that are over $1 million, $2 million, $3 million? Have you got numbers on that?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator. I don't
If you
know.
could, are you aware of any in particular? I mean, so you're not aware of any?
I'm aware, I'd have to take it on notice, Senator, but I'm aware that there are some individuals for whom there are quite significant
Yeah.
payments over time.
So, yeah, if you could take that on notice, and if you could provide, without going to extraordinary lengths of statistics that you don't keep or can't readily generate, but just what the sort of over time, what are the highest cumulative payments, and if you can break them down, so 500,000, $1 million, 2 million, 3 million, etc., just to give us an idea of some of the quantums. So the one-off, also, if you could get an update on that number, but also then cumulative, so two separate questions.
Okay. I'm very confident there's no update to the one-off response that you
Okay.
have there, Senator, but the cumulative payment question is a different
Can
one.
I just
Please.
make the point that on the 30th of May you sent a letter from my colleague Senator Chandler
That's correct.
asking for this information and for you to have it ready for this hearing. Is there a reason why you have to take it on notice when the questions were pre-prepared for you?
Senator, Mr Carrolley has the,
Has come to
he
the
has the
rescue.
answer.
Alex Carrolley, Assistant Secretary, Data and Insights, Department of Veteran Affairs. In response to Senator Chandler's question, we were able to put together a list of the top 10 permanent impairment compensation payments made. The top one was 1.647 million, and that is for the period 1st of July to, I think it was the 31st of May this year.
Sorry, can you just clarify that? So, sorry, is that the
So
largest payment or
largest
largest
payment?
cumulative, one-off or
One-off.
cumulative? Largest one-off payment?
That's right.
And that was made this year?
Last financial year.
Last,
Financial year, and that was for the period 1st of July
okay.
2023 to the 31st of May 2024.
So that was, 1.67 was for one veteran?
647, that's for one veteran.
1647. And can you say what that was for?
No, we can't without disclosing the personal information.
But presumably that was for very serious and permanent injuries.
I assume that would be correct, and that's under both combined DERCA and MERCA, so we've combined them all together.
What was the second, have you got the second largest?
1.319 million.
And when was that paid?
I don't have that information, but that was for the same period between.
Okay, so that was another one-off payment, but combination of both?
No, there was a one-off payment, so that was the second largest payment made.
No, but sorry, you said DERCA and MERCA payments, so it's combined payments?
So it was both for DERCA and MERCA PI
Yep.
schemes. So
And what was
we
the-
haven't separately.
And then what was it
separated them.
next underneath that? And that was last financial year as well?
That's right, last financial year.
So these are permanent impairment payments.
Yeah.
So they don't include the incapacity payments that the person might have received because Senator Chandler's letter referred to one-off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And the, so I won't, maybe if you could
And-
just table, maybe if it, after this you could table the whole list. But what was the third, just out of interest?
The third was 1.216 million
And that was last financial year as well?
last financial year.
And so while they were all three were last financial year, they are the largest in the history of DVA.
No, I don't have that information. They're the largest in the last financial year.
Last financial year, okay. So if you could take on notice also just where that sits historically. Yep, thanks.
All right, thank you. Now, just to be mindful to everyone, we are very tight for time tonight, so I'm going to be moving things along very efficiently. But I'm going to hand over to Senator O'Neill, then Senator Shoebridge, and then Senator Lambie. So, Senator O'Neill, you've got a block that I'll give you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully I'll be able to get through 2 lines of questioning in the allocated time. So, I've had a particular interest with regard to the PwC and other consultancies and the way in which they have interacted with the public service in recent times, and my questions really go to that. So have we got the right person? I do note your comments about significant changes to staffing and models in your opening statement, and they are very heartening, but I want to dig in, if I can, for a little. So it's no secret now that there was a widespread practice under the former government of the outsourcing of basic public sector work and projects to consulting firms. And I think it's pretty clear in the experience of the Department of Veterans Affairs and in veterans interactions that they were very much disadvantaged by that practice. So could I ask, did the All Hours Support Line cut DV experienced under the former government, did that lead to an increase in use of consulting and contractor firms?
Sorry, Senator, could you just repeat that?
So I understand that there was a ASL service, is that correct?
I don't know what that... Do you mean...
So All Hours Support Line, is that the jargon that you guys use?
It's not familiar to me, Senator.
Sorry, Senator. Tina Brooke, Chief Operating Officer. What's the... I do.
So the guts of it is there was a significant cut to access to service and support. My understanding there's an all-hours support line, and was that cut to DVA recipients?
So a call-in sort of line? Mr McLaren, to the best of my knowledge, no.
I can't find anyone here, Senator, who knows what that's referring to. I'm really sorry.
So perhaps that's only one part of the detail of what was cut. In terms of the cut to services under the former government, what services then, if it's not an all-hour support line, what was cut and how did that impact on the employment of consulting and contractor firms?
Sorry, Senator, I don't mean to disrespect, but I can't follow the questioning. So it has something to do with consultancies going down and an impact on services, is that...
So what my concern is public servants, were displaced. So that's the frame, right? Public service were displaced. That there are a number of cuts to services that occurred, and the retirement or the disappearing through a range of methods of people who worked in public service, and a replacement with contractors and consulting firms. And I'm seeking to understand what services were cut.
Senator, can I just... So I wasn't the secretary under the previous government, so I'm not in a position to know what was cut. I'm not aware. If I can just give you my perspective coming into the department, I was not aware that there were any services cut or jobs displaced. What I encountered was a significant number of non-ongoing staff and a higher proportion of labour hire staff, because the department had been funded for temporary increases in staffing numbers. So
let's just use your terms, non-ongoing, and what was the other?
Non-ongoing contract, Senator, and labour hire. So the nature of the funding previously had been time limited, and that meant it wasn't displacing existing public servants. It meant that there wasn't the option of recruiting additional permanent public servants. So new public servants were recruited via non-ongoing contracts and labour hire, and that has increased that has decreased massively since the department has been resourced with at least 500 additional ASL in the first budget in October 2022, and then additional permanent ASL since that time. So what that has done is reduce the labour hire proportion and the proportion of non-ongoing staff in the department. But I'm not aware
That's a helpful answer, Ms Frame.
Okay, great. Okay.
There is basically a very, very different attitude from what was prevailing under the previous government with regard to ongoing churning of staff provided from outside of the department to that uplift and a dedication of staff to the task of actually looking after our veterans. I mean, we were all outraged at what we saw overnight in the defacing of memorials to people who gave their lives in service. It's one thing to be outraged about that, and certainly that is worthy of outrage. But outrage doesn't cut it if people can't get access to the support and the services that they need. So my questions are going to a shift in focus that's occurred. My second question is a little more detailed, and you may be able to provide me with this information, if not now, on notice. So I'm keen to understand the contracting arrangements that have been or are currently in place between DVA and any of the major consulting firms. And just so we're clear about what I consider to be the major consulting firms from a general public point of view, we're talking PwC, Deloitte, EY, KPMG, Accenture, Boston Consulting, McKinsey and potentially Sayers Group. Do you have any relations with any of those, or do you have any major supplier who's a consulting firm?
If I could start, Senator, there is no current engagement with PwC and hasn't been since, I think, the middle of last year. They were in the actuarial space when I first came to the department, doing some work on actuarial modelling around claims. Ms Blewett can provide more detailed information, but to the best of my knowledge, apart from KPMG, in the internal audit space, I think it was EY and now is shared across a range of providers, but there's no other existing contracts that I'm aware of with those.
Ms Blewett?
Further to what the Secretary said, Senator, my contract with PwC, my memory serves me rightly, ended in August last year. That was
a natural conclusion to a contract that you had with them?
Yeah, it was an existing contract that we saw through and it terminated in August last year, is my recollection.
And now in your procurement practices, you are applying the standards
we do not have PwC at all. We do have what you would refer to in the top four. We have 7 contracts.
Yes.
They're with EY, KPMG. I actually don't have unless you've got them there. You can have a look. Off the top of my head, I do know they are in the data space. They're in our internal audit. So, and they are not also in our top 5 consultancies either. So while we have got services with those top 4, they don't appear in our top ranking contracting.
So the top 4 you're referring to there is the general parlance around these 4 major ones, but your top 5 are a different list, if I understand you correctly.
Yes,
so who are your top 5?
So my top 5, 5 largest contracts are with Bupa. That's with our clinical advisor services. DELEX Funds Management, which is our leasing office up in Brisbane.
Sorry, what was it?
DEX. Dexus, Funds Management Limited.
Yep.
They're our leasing office in Brisbane. The Trust Company, which is a leasing office in Sydney. Malcoa, which is the provision of independent medical examination services. Mm-hmm. And Charter Hall, which is also a leasing arrangement. Okay. They are our top contracted services.
And I have asked questions about Charter Hall and Colliers and other developers with regard to property management in other inquiries that we've been undertaking. So it's quite an interesting intersection of people in a similar place. Do you have any contracts? You said EY, KPMG. Is that it?
I don't.
No Deloitte. No Accenture. No
I don't
Boston
have that list in front of me, Senator.
So perhaps if you could fill that out for me.
Yeah.
Clearly, having your own in-house capacity is a very significant shift in terms of the quality of experience.
And Senator, I find with your earlier questions, I would like to add to that. I do understand what you were talking about with the ASL, so I can give you an example. I think this.
So is that an acronym for the All-Hour Service Support Line?
Average staffing
Yeah,
levels.
average staffing
okay,
level.
sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Senator, that's what it was, and I apologise, I didn't understand. So yes,
Okay.
it does stand for average staffing level.
Yep.
So I think when you were talking about labour hire and contractors, let me give you some figures if this is what you were referring to. So back in 21-22, 34% of our staffing was in labour hire and contractors.
Yep.
In 23-24, it's about 13% now. I
Wow.
think it's 12.7
Okay,
off the top
big
of my head.
change.
Is that the sort of thing you were
Yeah,
talking?
absolutely.
Okay. And then with the...
And not just because of the actual numbers revealing that very significant change, but embedded in that change is the change in experience of veterans who need to interact with people who are prepared, have longevity in the role and understand their particular circumstances.
Yeah, yes, Senator. And I suppose an example of that is the 24-25
Yes.
portfolio budget statement. So this budget, recent budget, has increased, for example, in Outcome 1, which is our claims processing and income support and that sort of area. But we have actually increased permanent ASL, I think the Secretary had mentioned, by 141 additional ASL on top of the 500. That actually means from 21-22 in the claims processing area, we had 276, I think if I'm right, off the top of my head, 276 permanent ASL. That has now gone up in 24-25, will increase permanent, that is to 887. I'm saying that off the top of my head, I think that's correct. That's basically a 360% increase, and that has provided greater certainty for our staff. Now, on top of that, for next year, we're receiving another 497 ASL, and that's in recognition we do need that additional non-ongoing on top of the permanency to continue to process those claims. We have a trajectory and we've done some modelling on that. And I'm pleased to say in this recent budget as well, we were able to land what we call our demand-driven funding model with the Department of Finance. So for a wee while we've been working with the Department of Finance to give them the evidence, to give them certainty and confidence that we developed a robust model so they could sign off on what was the permanent ASL we need, so average staffing level we need, for claims processing and service delivery, and then what was the additional, what we call the non-ongoing on top of that to ensure that we're well placed to continuing to
sort of
clear
pulse as
claims
required,
and that. So,
but not grow from zero
no,
for a month and
yeah.
then backwards and forwards with contractors
Correct.
creaming money off the top all the time.
We're seeing, the Secretary and I were in Perth recently.
I have the Perth
Yeah,
numbers.
and it was pleasing to see there that staff indicating the morale and the difference it made from them. So the the Perth office, get my
I have
language
the
right.
numbers, Senator. In Perth, in May 2022, there were 55 APS staff, 42 non-ongoing and 124 labour hire. In May 2024, there are 228 APS staff, 16 non-ongoing APS and 2 labour hire, a total of 246 staff. So the
Let's call
proportion
that
of
chalk and cheese.
the proportion of permanent staff, Senator, has changed in the Perth office from 25% to 93%.
Yeah. Now, that is a very, very significant change in a very short period of time, and I congratulate you on doing that. But I guess having interacted with the Veterans community, over the years that I've been in the Parliament, and nowhere near as much as people who are sitting here on this panel with me, I would seek your assurance that the quality of those experiences now absolutely remains the priority, because it's okay to have numbers and it's a big change. That is a big investment. But it's
It
the
does allow
quality
us
of
to
those
keep that
interactions that matter.
Yeah, it does allow us to keep that talent, Senator, you're right, where when we've got staff permanently on our books and we invest them in terms of their training, they'll stay with us longer. And we're starting to see that, particularly where we've been in a market where attracting staff has been quite competitive. Now that we can actually offer people a lot, larger portion of our staff ongoing, it is making a difference, which is we're really pleased to say.
I'm reassured by that, and I hope to come back and hear further improvements in in veterans' experiences as a consequence of that very significant budget allocation and shift in priority for creating safe jobs for people to do good work as public servants for others who need help in a time of need. I've just got a couple of other questions which really echo in some ways the questions that some of the comments that you made in your opening statement, Ms Frame. So I know that in earlier hearings you've covered off that there's been this major undertaking within the department to clear off a claims backlog. We've just discussed the change for labour hire, making the permanent APS. How has the conversion of labour hire staff been made possible? Is it simply the budget allocation? What else are you doing to make sure that you've got the right staff in the right place?
It's certainly the budget allocation provides the financial authority to go and recruit people on a permanent basis.
And how much is that budget allocation?
Ms Blewett would have the exact number. So there's been consecutive numbers across budgets, Senator. There's been additional allocations each budget.
Our departmental budget is around 600 million, I'm going to say it, somewhere around there. Senator, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Why I use that number, that is about wages and other supplier costs as well. But it has been a substantial increase, as I mentioned before, because of the additional ASL.
Senator Deputy Secretary Kefford has some additional information on that one.
Senator Andrew Kefford, Deputy Secretary Policy and Programs. And this year's budget, Senator, had an additional departmental funding as a result of the demand-driven funding model that Ms Blewett just referred to, of 186 million, which made provision for both the 141 additional ongoing staff and then a further significant number of non-ongoing staff, which is the flexibility the model provides for us to deal with the cases on hand and finish processing. So we dealt with the allocations backlog. We now have to move the rest of those old cases through to be operating within our timelines. And really what that demand-driven funding model means is the key issue now for us is the age of the cases on hand rather than the size of the pile. And so we're able to focus on that component. The other big difference that ongoing funding allows us to do is continue to both invest in training our staff, not just in understanding the law and their decision making, but the way in which they interact with veterans and families. But it also allows us to have a much better sense of providing a career progression. So one of the ways in which we're addressing that backlog of older cases is staff who might have joined us as claims support officers are now more experienced and better equipped with knowledge of how the Acts work. They can progress to higher level positions as and be trained as delegates, and then the commitment to ongoing funding allows us to then replace them. And so there's a significant efficiency that comes from not having to go through the process of constant recruitment. The effort that went into constant recruitment and management of the labour hire contracts can now be directed towards delivering decisions.
So the sort of churn and burn of staff was really a major preoccupation of the department because of the decisions of the previous government around their funding model and their economic mismanagement.
Well, Senator, what I would say is that managing a workforce that looks like the one the Secretary described in Perth, there's a significant effort that goes into managing the turnover in individuals and dealing with, from their perspective, understandably, the uncertainty of, will I stay with DVA, my contract's about to run out, I can get a contract somewhere else. Whereas now we can say, welcome to DVA, you're an ongoing public servant. We're now able to map out a career path, map out training and development and provide a worthwhile and rewarding public service career.
And so, Senator, sorry, just for the record, the 186 million that Mr Kefford mentioned, that's over 4 years. 20.6 of that is each year ongoing.
So if I can just go to my final question. We've talked about, that was then, this is now. I note that on the 9th of November, the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, Major General Liz Cossum, was asked when the backlog of claims would be cleared under the previous government's resourcing constraints, and she confirmed it would never be cleared, which is a telling indictment of that period of time. I just want to ask an open-ended question. If you could give me with some clarity, an understanding of what it's like now for a veteran to approach the department and have a claim managed. How does that look different to what it was as recently as 2 years ago? And how many are we talking about now?
Certainly, Senator, in the numbers that I highlighted in my opening statement, for a veteran approaching the department now with an initial liability claim, which is the first step in the claims process there, MERCA is the most current act, and half of our claims, over half of our claims are MERCA initial liability claims. Those claims, if a veteran has approached us since 1 December last year, the processing time for those claims is 52 days. That's the total processing time. And on average, those claims are allocated for processing within 7 days of receipt in the department. So what that means is the current experience of a veteran is they lodge the claim, and I've acknowledged earlier there's still veterans who are waiting on claims to be determined. So we still have that historical backlog of decisions to work through. But for veterans...
So there's still some cleaning up that you are doing, some serious work to overcome the backlog that you inherited, well, that was there when the Labor government came in.
That's right, Senator. There were two backlogs, effectively. There was an allocation backlog that the Royal Commission identified and said these claims haven't even been looked at by anyone. There was over 44,000 in that category that hadn't even been opened. And then there was an even bigger backlog of claims that hadn't had a decision made on them. So even in addition to the 44,000 in the Royal Commission identified backlog, there were also many claims that had not, someone had opened it and had started the process, but a decision, a determination had not been made on the claim for the veteran, so they were still waiting.
Right.
So the claims allocation backlog has been eradicated and that was concluded in February this year. There are still those claims in the determinations backlog from those historical, the times when we didn't have the processing staff. But as I was making clear in the opening statement, for a veteran who approaches the department now with a MERCA initial liability claim, the average time taken to process is 52 days, and the interaction would be that at the point they lodge the claim, they would get a contact within those 7 days. When it says allocated for processing within 7 days, that means they would get a phone call from someone saying, I'm in DVA, I've got your claim, we've allocated it to someone for processing, and then they would get the contact around the processing of the claim and have, as required, maybe they ring and say, we actually need something additional in terms of medical information, or maybe they don't need anything additional and they just go and finalise the decision, and the veteran is getting a decision on average within 52 days.
Thank you very much, Secretary. I'm sorry, but we need to move the call along. Now, I'm going to hand the call over to Senator Shoebridge for the next 15 minutes, then Senator Lambie, and then I'll be going back to the opposition.
Okay, thank
Senator
you.
Shoebridge.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Secretary Frame and your team for turning up. I do want to acknowledge the achievements, and I think they're real, but you do face a number of challenges over the next 12 months. One is the harmonisation task, which I assume will be quite resource intensive, bringing together multiple different statutory schemes under the one umbrella. I'm assuming that will be relatively resource intensive.
The implications would be, Senator, in terms of potential increases in claims being lodged under the old and the existing regime. If the legislation was passed, there might be some changed claiming patterns around veterans wanting to lodge under the existing schemes, and then potential impacts after the changeover as well. Mr Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. We have anticipated that there may be increases on either side of 1 July 2026 for people that want to take advantage of the current system prior to the changeover for various reasons, and those that may claim after the transition date. And in my EFO of last year, the department was provided around $40.1 million to implement the changes, a range of activities incorporated into that funding, but includes some capacity to deal with that anticipated increase in claims.
It's not just, though, the claims you're going to deal with mid-2026, either side of the change. I assume it's going to be quite resource intensive to do it, to implement the changes, to change the back end to train people. I assume that's going to be resource intensive.
I certainly wouldn't want to diminish the effort required, Senator, but it isn't a new piece of legislation. It is moving people into a piece of legislation that's been in existence for 20 years. So there's still system support. We have staff that know how to administer that legislation. So you're right, but there is also that factor to take into account.
And I'm presuming the government's commitment is to eliminate the backlog and then have systems in place so that no new backlog is created. Apart from there'll inevitably be a tiny lag or some kind of lag between the receipt of claims and its allocation and decisions.
Yes.
But I'm presuming the government's plan is to avoid having a backlog as such.
Yes, Senator, and that's what Deputy Secretary Blewett was referring to with the funding decision around the demand-driven funding model that is about realising that.
It's with that I was surprised to see that the budget is for a cut in staff. When I look at page 16, table 1.1, it shows that there's a cut in the average staffing level from last financial year to this financial year, dropping from 3,266 to 3,188.
Yes, Senator. There is, in fact, in terms of permanent staffing levels, only an increase. That is captured by some non-ongoing staff reductions that were some terminating measures relating to digitisation of records and some other measures like that. But Ms Blewett might have some additional information for you. But that the permanent staffing levels have only increased, Senator, and that change that you're referring to there regards only some non-ongoing staff numbers that were terminating at the end of time-limited measures. So there were non-ongoing staff doing, for example, the digitisation of records. They digitised over 500 million records, I think, was it? Or
more than 580,000.
Oh, no, it was over 580,000 records they digitised. The non-ongoing staff who were doing those activities terminated.
How many staff is that?
For that measure, off the top of my head, I think it's around 26 for that particular measure. Senator, I think the key thing, and as you would know, there's the number of terminating measures. There's always ons and offs every year, and it is correct that the 24-25 portfolio budget statements do show a decrease of 78, I think is what you're referring to, from 23-24 to 24-25 ASL. That 78, as the Secretary has mentioned, is a reflection of a number of terminating measures. There's a reducing wait time, modernisation wait time measure that the Secretary referred to. There's some ASL that was associated with the Ledger reform, and even though we've got an additional measure in the budget of the $222 million with Ledger reform, there was ASL attributed to...
None of those will come from case management? Is that what we
they're not,
none of those cuts?
No, they're not the case management ones. There's the MyEFO, there's a MyEFO one-off of $18.6 million, which we were given, which translated, Senator, to a costing of about 124 ASL. In reality, we didn't secure that ASL, and as you would appreciate, MyEFO comes out in December, and I think off the top of my head, it was a bit over 64 ASL, net ASL in outcome one. So while the measure gave us the money and translated in the costing to 124, we didn't actually secure that ASL. So that's why you're seeing that drop. And the point the Secretary is making is, okay, you want me to stop?
No, I understand. Could I then go to the sort of the very large projected increase in program expenses under the different compensation schemes? I'm looking at program 1.6, page 28 of the budget papers, and maybe this is what you were speaking to, Mr. Brown. It shows that the total program expenses under the Military Rehabilitation Compensation Act and also the Safety Rehabilitation Compensation Act rising from $3.8 billion in this year's budget to $6.6 billion, a $2.8 billion increase in 25-26, and then falling back down again to $4 billion the year after. What's that $2.8 billion increase for?
Senator, that pertains to the backlog of claims. So there were all those claims sitting there that had not been processed, and that increase in administered expenditure there anticipates the spike associated with determining those claims, making disbursements in line with those claims, and then returning to that business as usual level that you referred to earlier.
How is all of that happening in 25-26? You've been removing backlogs, determining claims, backlogs down substantially. How is this $2.8 billion all happening in 25-26?
As I said, Senator, though, I made it clear that there were two backlogs. There was the allocations backlog that's cleared. They're all being processed, all those ones that the Royal Commission identified. There is still a determinations backlog, and they are the claims that are still waiting decisions. And there are veterans who'll tell you they're still waiting for their decision.
Yeah, but these, Secretary Frame, this says they're going to be waiting another 12 months for the payment.
We'll still be, that is correct, Senator. We will be continuing to make those determinations over the next 12 months.
Well, no.
And thereafter.
Sorry, Secretary Frame, what this is saying, if I'm reading the budget papers right, fairly constant payments in 23-24, marginal increase in 24-25, a $2.8 billion spike, not this financial year, but more than 12 months from now, over that financial year, and then back again to normality. Is that really what's planned? To delay paying veterans pretty much any additional payments apart from the historical norm for this entire financial year?
I don't agree, Senator, that it's about delaying paying veterans. What it's about is about the time taken to make the determinations. And it is in line with the rates at which we are working in the department. Those claims are being allocated at record levels. Determinations are being made at record levels. But there are still...
no payments are being made.
Claims outstanding. Claimants, they are increasing,
Allow
Senator.
the Secretary to finish, please.
I do think that's reasonable, Chair. The Secretary is providing accurate information that is immediately relevant to the questions being asked by Senator Shoebridge, and this is a complicated area where the government is working through a very significant problem that was created by a level of underfunding and under-resourcing from the previous government. Ms Frame is providing sensible answers to the questions. I think it would just be good, Senator, if we could allow her to complete her answers.
Senator Frame, you're going to explain how you have this one-off surge, not this financial year, like pretty much no additional, very marginal increase this financial year, but this one-off surge of $2.8 billion next financial year, and what that's going to mean for dollars in the pockets of veterans who have been waiting years and years and years for determinations.
It's after another 12-month period, Senator, there's an anticipated spike associated with permanent impairment payments, and that just reflects the rate of processing in the department at the moment, which, as I've said, is at record levels, but there are record numbers of claims there awaiting determination.
So how is it that we're not getting at least a proportion of those permanent impairment claims from the backlog paid in this financial year?
There is some increase there that you can see, Senator, there is.
Well, yeah, like less than $200 million from a $3.66 billion starting base. That's basically inflation and a tiny bit. How is it that veterans who have been, and I think you acknowledge, waiting years and years and years, are being told by this budget papers they're going to wait another year?
It's not that anyone is saying they have to wait either, Senator. We're just projecting as best we can when those permanent impairment payments might be made. And if our processing allows us to make those payments faster, the payments will be made, but these are the budget projections. And as you can see, they certainly anticipate a really significant increase in disbursements to veterans over the next few years in permanent impairment. But I acknowledge your point that there is that spike associated with elimination of the determinations backlog. But I also point out there are increases leading up to that as well, Senator, and then it's anticipated that it will revert to a lower level after the spike has been addressed.
Well, we might come back to this after I cross-reference some of the dashboard indicators. Just the last little bit of this round, I have some questions about overseas war graves. Is that you, Ms McLaren? You've timed your entry well. The very disturbing report from CNN in January of this year that Israeli forces had desecrated multiple graves in Gaza. I know there are more than 260 Australian soldiers buried in that Gaza war cemetery just near the town of Al-Tafa. Can you give an update on what damage has been done to Australian war graves?
So, Senator, the last report that the Commonwealth War Graves Commission received was in March 2024, which acknowledged grave concerns for their colleagues in Gaza but reported them to be safe. They acknowledged that the Gaza War Cemetery had suffered some damage and the head gardener's house had been destroyed, but we have not been able to receive any additional information since that time in March.
But I've got more updated information from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission than March. I can get that on Google. Are you really saying that the most recent information you have is from March?
Well, that is the most recent information that has been provided.
But no, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission put out a public statement in May of this year. Did they not give that to you?
The latest information that has been given to me was in March.
Well, in May of this year, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission said as they were pulling their staff out of Gaza because it was unsafe, they said, "We're aware that both cemeteries have suffered damage, but the extent is currently unknown." And then they're hoping to restore the sites at some point.
Well, and that's exactly what they said to us in March, that the cemeteries had suffered damage.
Have you inquired about what damage the Australian war graves have suffered? 263 Australian war graves?
So, I'm aware there's 259 war graves in Gaza. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission will, when it is safe, undertake further inspections in the site. They do maintain that site. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission maintains that site on behalf of all countries that do have graves within that area.
The DVA website, your website, says there are 263 war graves in the Gaza Australian war graves from World War I and World War II in that cemetery. Is that right, the 263 figure from your website?
Well, I'll confirm that. I'll take that on notice, Senator.
CNN reported that an artillery shell had landed, an Israeli artillery shell had landed in the Gaza War Cemetery in Al-Tafa. Did the department make any inquiries of the Israeli military as to the damage that had been done to Australian war graves?
We did not make inquiries to the Israeli military.
This isn't the first time, though, that the Israeli military has destroyed Commonwealth war graves in Gaza, is it?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator.
Well, I mean, it's widely reported that in 2006, 2008 and 2010, the Israeli military destroyed Commonwealth war graves. And indeed, on each occasion, the British government demanded and was paid some compensation. Has the Australian government ever sought compensation for the destruction of Australian war graves by the Israeli military?
So the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, they look after all war graves in Gaza, including the Australian war graves.
Yes.
And so as such, the Commonwealth War Graves, they'll make an assessment when they're able to get into the site.
Did the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, have they advised the Australian government of damage to any Australian war graves by the Israeli military and at any time since 2006? And if so, what?
So I can take on notice prior to this year. In relation to this year, they have advised that there has been damage to the cemetery, but the extent of that damage is unknown at this time.
Did you make any inquiries of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission if they had satellite images, if they had other reports about the desecration of Australian graves?
I'll take that on notice.
Senator, we can confirm with the head of the Office of War Graves he may have some additional information. So we will take that on notice and come back to you.
All right. Well, I may have some other questions on this in a bit.
Move the call on. Now, Senator Lammy's not here. So Senator Davey or Senator Reynolds? Okay. Okay, well, I'll give you a 10-minute block, and then when Senator Lamy arrives, I'll hand the call back to her. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Could we come back to permanent impairment claims, if we could? And my understanding is that, in fact, this is off your website, if permanent impairment compensation for non-economic loss becomes payable, the claimant will receive a DVA letter asking them to advise the department in writing if they intend to institute an action or proceeding against the Commonwealth for damages for that non-economic loss. Now, as I understand it, the amount payable by way of common law non-economic loss is $110,000. So, but once you make an election to take action against the Commonwealth, the permanent impairment is not payable. Can you just unpack that arrangement for me, please?
It's pretty much as you've stated it, Senator. It's a common feature of all statutory compensation schemes. It's designed to encourage people into the statutory scheme as opposed to seek damages through common law recourse. It is per condition under the MERCA, so you get offered that choice per condition. Oh, sorry, no, that's under the DIRCA. It's per condition. I'll take that back, Senator. It's for all the person's conditions under the MERCA. And they are offered a choice. They're given a determination about the amount they can get under the MERCA, but they're also given the choice to pursue common law damages, and once they pursue those common law damages, the amount isn't payable under the MERCA. I will point out that under the VETS bill, the exposure draft that we put out for consultation, the amount of 110 is increasing to $177,000.
And that was my next question, so that's where I was going, so thank you for that. So $177,000. Can you just so the process itself, so how does it work in terms of if they say that they intend to make a civil claim, then do you wait until actually whether they've made a civil claim and that's successful? Or how does the process work in terms of timing?
No, once the election is made, they're no longer payable permanent impairment under the legislation.
Okay. Okay, that's that question. That was pretty... Well, now, in relation to the material that Senator Chandler we referred to previously that she'd asked to bring, rather than going through that in deference to time and other colleagues, rather than going through asking questions on that, have you got all of that material here you can table? I can go through the list, but I think... I mean, I can go through and ask them individually, but I think it would be easier if we just get that information tabled.
Given time constraints.
It may not be in a form that can be tabled.
It's not, Senator. It's not all set out in a form responding, but we have brought answers to the table if we were asked these questions, as we'd advised Senator Chandler that we would attempt to do.
So you've got it here, but you can't table it.
I don't have it in a comprehensive form. We have. I know Ms McLaren. There was one in Ms McLaren's space. So I'm sorry, Senator, I can't provide it to you on one piece of paper with the answers and table it in that way. I would need some time to compile them.
Senator
well,
Reynolds,
we might have to, Chair, then go through. I'm still a bit stumped. If I just go through the individual questions that were asked.
How many were there?
Pardon?
How many were there?
I haven't got the letter. You've got the letter here. Five.
Paid questions, but there were.
Sure.
Well, I can go through them each, and then because the question was, can you table the information that you're supposed to bring? So, have you got Senator Chandler's
and Senator,
letter there?
I think you recall in a response I wrote, I said we would bring answers as best we could to the table on the night of estimates, and anything we couldn't answer, we'd take on notice.
Have you got the letter?
Thank you.
Okay.
And can I just point out, Senator, also in that correspondence I said the tabling deadline in relation to the questions asked is 25 July. But we said we would take anything on notice, we would answer anything that we're able to at the table tonight, and the advance notice provided by the Senator equipped us to bring some of those answers this evening.
Some but not all. So if I just quickly run through the list of the things that you're asked to bring, can you let us know what you've got, what you can table tonight, and what you might have to then put on?
Sorry, Chair. I'm
Yep.
sorry to interrupt you, Senator Reynolds. I just wonder if the easiest thing might be for Senator Reynolds just to ask her questions, because the officials will provide what information that they have, either verbally or if there is material that is suitable for tabling, they will table it.
So, just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, so Senator Chandler wrote to you, Secretary, on the 30th of May. So I'm talking about that letter of the 30th of May.
That's right, Senator, and I responded on the 6th of June.
Okay. So can you just go through, I mean, I can...
Many of these questions asked, Senator, is information also that's available on our website.
The old website, book. That's the government's... Oh, good Lord. Okay, I'll put that aside for a minute. I've got
we
some
are
other...
limited for time, so...
Well, yes, I know,
ask
Chair.
questions.
I was seeking... So, we have a letter from the 30th of May about the questions that we're asking them to have available to table today. So I'll just go... I've got another couple of questions and I'll come back to that because I think...
If you've got anything else to park this letter and this question, then we'll go to something else in the meantime.
Okay, the first question, the next question goes to a Victoria Cross nomination for Richard Norden, DCM. Now, I know that that's not necessarily sitting with you directly at the moment, but we're trying to work out what DVA currently knows about it. So if I can just ask you a couple of questions. So the first question is the Department aware of the Defence Honours and Awards Appeal Tribunal recommendation to award the late Private Richard Norden, DCM, the Victoria Cross?
Senator, the Department of Veterans Affairs don't have any role with those processes.
Okay, so that wasn't my question. I know you don't have the role and I understand it's sitting somewhere in the defence ether at the moment, but I'm just asking, are you or any of your officials aware of this and where it is currently sitting in the process before it comes to you? So the first thing is, the next question is, did the department provide any advice to the ADF or to the Minister in relation to the Appeals Tribunal's recommendation to Defence?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
Which is consistent with the answer to the last question.
Yes, and that's what I was going to come to.
May I provide my answer and then you could ask your question?
You.
That is consistent with the last answer that was provided, which is that this is not a role for this department.
Senator McAllister, thank you for the statement of the bleedingly obvious. I appreciate that. But you did say that the government, last month you said that the government is considering it. Is it still with Minister Miles or has it now progressed? Has he made a decision and has it progressed to Government House and to the Palace, or is the Minister still considering it, or has the Minister got some further advice on it, and if so, from whom?
Senator, those are questions for the Department of Defence and the ADF, and that's examined in a different part of the hearings. We're here to talk about the Department of Veterans Affairs, and officials are here to answer questions about the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Again, thank you for the statement of the bleedingly obvious. So I will take that as you saying on behalf of the government that it is still sitting with the Minister.
Senator Reynolds, you may, my statement may be taken in its literal meaning, which is that this is a matter for another hearing and another agency.
Thank you for that very non-helpful response, Minister. Okay,
Senator,
well, let's go back to
we are here to help
letter.
and answer questions. If you wish to ask questions relevant to this department, we are willing to answer
I've got one more
them.
minute left, and then I'm going to hand the call to Senator Lambie. So let's go back to this letter. So are you going to ask the questions, or are we just going to ask the department to answer them?
Well, the department has got, well, it depends on how much time, Chair, you want to belabour this, because you've had the letter now since the 30th of May, and we had expected that you would be able to come and table this material.
Well, Senator, I have the letter in front of me and it doesn't make any reference to tabling things. It simply asks, and Senator Chandler penned the letter, not yourself, but the letter, as I understand it, reads, I request the department provide the following detailed information.
Okay. I will go through them one by one then, and to see whether the department has that information tonight and whether it is information they can table or will take on further notice. So the first one is the number of veterans receiving compensation under the Safety, Rehabilitation and Compensation Act the DIRCA and also the MERCA, and the number of veterans receiving fortnightly disability compensation payments under the Veterans Entitlement Act. Do you have that data here tonight?
Alex Carroll, Assistant Secretary. We have some of that data available by month, going back to June 2022.
Okay, are you able to table that?
I can't table it in this form because it's still a draft document, but I can certainly...
We'll provide it on notice, Senator. My response to Senator Chandler on the 6th of June said, thank you for your questions on notice. We are working to respond to the questions within the tabling deadline of 25 July. However, we will, if at time permitting, we will of course endeavour to answer as many of your questions as possible at the upcoming hearing, which is what we're doing tonight. And Mr Carroll has some of the numbers, but we have not brought them along in a form to be tabled. We didn't undertake to do that, and we have till the 25th of July to provide the comprehensive responses.
Well, I don't agree with what Senator Chandler asked you. However, so can you go through the information that you have got available here with Mr Carroll, and then if you can take it on notice to provide the rest?
He snuck up again.
I can certainly answer some of the questions. Some of the questions involve detailed tables which may take a considerable amount of time to run through each of the numbers. But if there are certain questions that I can answer...
Let me just be very clear. Through you, Secretary, that you will provide an answer to these questions, but just you can't do that tonight.
Yes, Senator. They were just submitted a week before the hearing as questions on notice, and we are answering them as questions on notice. But I wrote a letter saying if there's any we can answer at the table, we will do that.
Okay.
And we
so
will
the committee would expect to receive something by the 25th of July.
That's correct, Senator.
A month before the hearing, not a week before.
That's okay, but
Look, Chair, out of deference to you and the committee, can you please, everything that has been asked for by Senator Chandler on the 30th of May for the 6th of June estimates hearing, can you please, well, to be held...
Anyway, keep going with your question.
6th of June, because that was actually... So the request was actually for the 6th of June. So can you please take all of those on notice? If you can't table any of that tonight, can you please make sure that you provide all of that and not just parts now, because it's, quite frankly...
Senator, we're treating them as questions on notice, which they are, and as I've said, we came prepared to answer questions on the 6th of June or tonight, but we didn't come prepared to table information outside of a standard questions on notice timeframe, which is what I set out in my letter. And we're happy to answer questions that we have information available.
You were asked to provide this information, and we didn't get to it on the 6th of June, which was several weeks ago. So, look, if you could just take them...
But, Senator, I didn't undertake to bring all the information to the table on the 6th of June or this evening. That's not what I undertook to do in my response.
I'm happy to table the correspondence that's been going on if people want to, but it's very clear from the Department Secretary that she hasn't undertaken to table anything tonight or the previous round. When we were due to have estimates with Veterans Affairs, but did say, as she's already articulated, she will work to respond to questions within the tabling deadline on the 25th of July.
But, Chair, as you know, look...
I don't want to waste time, but I'm just trying to say that the Department will come...
Deference for time, Chair.
Can I just finish? The Department will come and answer the questions. They just cannot do it in a form that they can table tonight. But they will endeavour to answer the questions by the 25th of July.
They were given notice on the 30th of May, which... to come prepared on the 6th of June to answer these questions. So the courtesy was paid by this committee on the 30th of May for the department to come prepared on the 6th of June to have all this information available. It is now July,
and the department's
and we don't have all the information to provide here tonight.
And the department's working with
Mr. Carroll just said he didn't have all the information tonight.
Well,
so they don't have this from the 30th of May request.
Okay. And the department is working within the standing orders. But anyway, Minister, you want to add something, because we're going to table these documents.
This is outrageous,
Minister, and then I'm going to hand over to Senator Lambie.
Simply that officials are here to answer questions. To date, Senator Reynolds has been asking for a particular form. She's asking for written information. But I think if there are questions...
May, Minister.
If I may... I didn't interrupt you when you were making a statement earlier. If there are questions you wish to ask about claims processing, the age distribution of claims, the more detailed information about that is relevant to questions on note in writing numbers 452 and 453, officials are prepared to answer those questions. Were there things that you sought in relation to this that you wanted to explore this evening? If there's, officials are prepared to discuss the issues that you signalled as relevant to the hearing. They have also indicated that they're intending to provide a written response to the request in the same time frame as all other questions on notice will be answered for this round.
So I think this is where the issue is, Chair, is Senator Chandler very clearly asked the department, paid the department the courtesy of saying, please come prepared on Thursday the 6th to answer questions which are entirely appropriate for budget estimates to be asked.
Yes, it's not common for budget estimates to involve the handing over of documents. It's a verbal examination of the issues.
Just one at a time. All right, look, team, can I just say we are wasting a bit of time here. We've got precious time. From what I took from the Department Secretary, they will be providing a response, just they're not doing it tonight, but they will do it by the 25th of July. Am I correct?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Lambie, you've got the call.
Thank you. Thank you. Secretary, a family in Queensland, I'm sure, just let me know if you're aware of this, a family in Queensland lost a mother to suicide many years ago, and the veteran father to suicide in early May 2024. I've been told that DVA was advised and they would not assist the two boys until all the paperwork had been completed. The paperwork is still not complete, and the boys are surviving on handouts from a veterans charity organisation and other ex-service organisations. Are you aware of the situation I'm talking about?
I am, Senator.
Okay. Are we still waiting on the paperwork?
Senator, I can't discuss individual cases.
Okay.
Here.
All right. Okay. Let's just do it this way. Have you had somebody from the department or an advocate that you've asked to go and see that family or those children to help fill out that paperwork if that is not done?
Senator, I can't provide personal information. I can't disclose information other than to say I'm aware of it and we are assisting wherever we can.
Okay. Do we not have an urgent financial assistance that we can, without waiting for paperwork, we can just install something to get payments done? Are we still not up to that?
We're doing everything we can, Senator.
But we have no system in place in DVA when these sort of things happen that we can start making payments until we get what we need and determine. I'm quite sure that this does not occur very often, and I'm sure that even if DVA was to lose a little bit of money, if this was not correct or something was not right, surely there must be a department that can assist with this effective immediately without waiting for paperwork.
Senator, I can only reiterate my previous response is that we're doing everything that we are able to do.
Okay. Does DVA have something in place that when these situations arrive, that financial assistance can start straight away until you get what is required?
Senator, would it be okay if I asked the department to speak in general terms? I know that you commence your questioning about a specific case, and I think you'll know because you advocate so regularly for people that we're reluctant to discuss specific cases in a public forum.
But I understand that,
but
Minister.
I do think it would be good for the department to talk about the general approach they take in situations where the circumstances are very difficult and very obviously difficult for a family. Would that be okay?
So Deputy Secretary Kefford can provide some information, and we'll do it as quickly as possible, Senator, around the acute support package and how that works and how we seek to, use the flexibility that exists within that package.
Okay, so that's great. I know what that is. So why hasn't that package been used?
I refer to my previous response, Senator, that we are doing everything we are able to.
Okay. All right. I'd like to speak about Leonie Noland. She was promoted into her current job as Open Arms National Manager. She was the subject of a written complaint to the Veterans Affairs Minister Darren Chest on the 22nd of July 2020 regarding her misconduct as a manager of the $2.1 million comprehensive health assessments contract to Bupa. So, according to media reports, the $2.1 million Bupa contract managed by Nolan is the subject of numerous complaints to the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Are you aware of that?
Excuse me, sorry. I have the Chief Operating Officer here, Senator.
Sorry, Senator, what was the actual question?
Okay.
I heard you. Sorry, I know you were explaining the situation.
According to media reports, the $2.1 million Bupa contract managed by Ms Nolan is the subject of numerous complaints to the National Anti-Corruption Commission. I'm just asking, is she been stood aside until investigation's done? Or what has happened here?
So, Senator Tina Bullock, Chief Operating Officer, as you would appreciate, it would not be appropriate for me to talk about individual. I'm not trying to be clever here. It absolutely is not appropriate. If there was an investigation being undertaken either internally of a staff member, we have to afford that staff member due process and go through that until the outcome. Separately, if a staff member was referred to the NAC, I would not be privy to that information at all. The NAC has been quite clear about, in their early stages of development of their role, to actually get into detailed information may well compromise investigation. So I personally would not know if a staff member had been referred to the NAC.
Okay, are you aware that 2 days after that written complaint to the Minister and allegations about her misconduct, that Leonie Nolan sent a letter direct to the complainant on the 20 July 2020, dismissing the complaint against herself, and the letter said, and I quote, "Thank you for your correspondence to the Minister. The Minister has asked me to respond on his behalf." Firstly, can you tell me whether the Minister did in fact ask Ms Nolan to respond on his behalf? Do you know whether there's been an investigation and whether we've concluded that evidence out yet?
Senator, everything you're referring to is from 2020. I commenced.
She's in there now, Secretary. Are you aware of the complaints?
Can I just complete my response, please, Senator?
Okay.
Just one at a time. One at a time. Just hang on. Just everyone one at a time. Secretary, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. When I commenced as Secretary in January 2023, I was obviously informed about anything on foot, any current investigations or any current complaints against staff that were the subject of current investigation, but I would not be looking into anything historical that predated that which I was briefed about at the time I assumed the role, Senator. So I'm not in a position to answer questions about allegations or complaints made in 2020. And I don't think it's appropriate to discuss individual staff members here in front of the Estimates Committee, and I don't think there's anything more I can add, Senator.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Okay, on January the 24th last year, the day after you started work as the DVA Secretary, your Security Chief, Roger McNally, signed a 695-page affidavit to the Administration Appeals Tribunal alleging that people who use the FOI process to undercover wrongdoing in your department, including key witnesses to the ongoing Royal Commission, were security threats. Paragraphs 8 to 10, McNally says, and I quote, "I have been involved in the security industry and intelligence community within the Commonwealth for over 30 years. Prior to being employed in the department, I worked in the Australian intelligence community for many years. I am duly authorised to make this affidavit on behalf of the applicant, that being the Secretary of the Department, that being yourself. Can you confirm that the contents of this affidavit written by your intelligence officer were submitted to the AAT with your formal knowledge and approval?"
I'm aware of it, Senator.
Did you approve it?
I can't recall
Senator,
at the time.
Was that? I think that might have been before your time.
No, the Senator said it was a day after I started.
Oh. That's correct.
But I just can't recall, Senator, whether it was put in front of me. I don't think it would be customary that it would be.
No, Senator, I would be very surprised if that would have been put in front of the Secretary. I can't, but we can check. But Mr McNally, as you would appreciate, in his job as head of our Integrity and Security branch, is required to present particular evidence or statements when a matter is brought to his attention. I am aware of a statement presented as part of an AAT matter, but I can take on notice to see whether there's any record that would have been brought to the Secretary's attention. But in her first or second day, I would be very surprised that had occurred, recognising that would be part of Mr McNally's regular job to undertake those activities and functions.
Okay. Okay. Mr McNally is subject of a recent complaint to the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security. The copy I have here says, and I'm sure you're aware of it, Mr McNally appears to have engaged in a targeted vendetta against people who lawfully used FOI processes for its intended purposes and exposed DVO's toxic culture to the security of the Royal Commission. Are you aware of this complaint?
Senator Lambie, are you reading from a document or a source? It's difficult to comment on a complaint if we don't know its origin.
What is Mr McNally doing exactly? Why don't you explain me his job? What does Mr McNally do?
Senator, Mr McNally is the Assistant Secretary of our Integrity and Security branch. He has a range of functions he's responsible for. Under his leadership, there are security incidents that are reported to him. There are tip-offs that are made. That may be in relation to fraud, non-compliance. It can be in a relation to a safety issue that a staff member may experience. But he is our Chief Security Officer. So functions and activities that fit under that remit are Mr McNally's responsibility. And I am aware, and Senator, I believe that you have been copied in on emails which have been sent to me with complaining. And I have looked into those matters, and as I say, while it would not be appropriate for me to get into talking about individuals, whether that be about the person who's making the complaints as well, what I am confident, because I did ask the head of our People Services area to look into matters that were raised with me personally on this, and they were able to confirm and look into the activities that Mr McNally undertook in relation to the allegations made against him were part of his regular functions and activities.
So that investigation, did you say there was an investigation done?
Was an investigation, was a review. I wanted confidence when someone was making an allegation against a staff member. I wanted my People Services area to look into to see whether confirming that the functions have undertaken were within the remit of Mr McNally. And I was given the confidence that did occur.
Right. And what qualifications did that person have who was looking at Mr McNally?
So that is my Assistant Secretary who was in charge of the People Services. They are a HR professional and they're appropriately qualified. That is about bringing independence, so it wasn't Mr McNally himself looking into the particular claim.
Okay.
So it's a separate area.
Right.
It would be normal thing that if someone made an allegation against a staff member, our People Services area, so our Chief People Officer area, would look into those matters.
Okay, so you've got a qualified investigator into HR these days, do we?
So I wouldn't call it an investigation. No, it's a... No, Senator, when someone brings something to my attention, I have a duty to actually look into if an allegation is made against a staff member. I want confidence that that staff member has undertaken their job within the remit of what their responsibilities, and I'm confident Mr McNally had done that.
Okay. You got any more questions on this?
I do.
Okay. Because I need to move the call along, but you've got a few more, or how many?
Yes, I have plenty.
Okay. So I'm going to go to Senator Shoebridge for the next 12 minutes. You've got the call.
Thanks, Chair. Can I go back to the $2.8 billion surge, not in this financial year, but next financial year?
And then I'll come to you, Perrin.
Do I understand you think the bulk of that is related to MERCA permanent impairment payments? You said permanent
Senator, I mean,
impairments.
that's where a large proportion of claims emanate from in terms of being assessed under that Act. I'm not sure if anyone has any more information about a breakdown across the acts of those payments. Obviously, the lump sums are only DIRCA and MERCA.
Yeah, but the rate of DIRCA to MERCA is
I might need
close
to
to
take that on notice.
tenfold greater numbers under MERCA than DIRCA.
So, Senator, I've just had confirmed from Ms Blewett it is the MERCA, MERCA only quantums there that show that spike in 25-26 that you're referring to.
So I'm just trying to square that with your proposed increases or decreases in processing times. The budget papers say that last financial year that's just finished, only 14% of claims were processed within 100 days. You're saying in this financial year, more than half of claims are going to be processed within 100 days. So a radical increase in the time within which claims are going to be processed, and that's good. But how is it that there are no additional payments?
Can I just clarify, Senator, what you referring to there?
Page 31 of the budget.
The time taken to process when it incorporates older claims that have been in the backlog for a long time is obviously a longer period of time because the average is affected by the claims and how long they have been sitting there. The ones that I referred to earlier where there's a much shorter time taken to process are the claims that have only just come in, obviously, in the last 6 months.
So you're going to be much more rapidly deciding claims this financial year?
New claims, Senator, yes, new claims.
So that means you're going to be making compensation payments. You're going to be bringing them forward from the historic norm. If you'd stuck to the historic norm, those payments would have taken much longer to pay this year, correct?
Are you talking permanent impairment?
Yep, new claims that have come in, assuming they're coming this year. If you'd stuck to the historic norm, a whole bunch of them wouldn't be paid this financial year because it would take forever to process them. If you'd stuck to the historic norm, a lot of them would have been paid next financial year. Do you accept that?
Yes, I do, Senator.
So
yes.
that should explain of itself a significant increase in MERCA payments in this financial year. But when I look at the budget papers, it hardly moves. And I can't understand that.
Senator,
just let me finish my question. You're then meant to be dealing with thousands and thousands and thousands of backlogged MERCA claims, and yet none of those are showing up in this year's budget papers either. We get this mysterious lump that turns up next financial year. It doesn't make sense.
Senator, there's a number of things at play here. Part of this is a reflection of the budget update now, and some of that growth in claims activity, which has been speeding up over the last 2 years, would be already built in. The other component about why there is a timing difference, as you've identified it, is the way in which the decisions are made. Is there can be and is quite often a lag between when the initial liability decision is made and when the permanent impairment decisions are made. The other component that confounds this, and this might be something we can provide a breakdown for on notice, is we are seeing both an increase in claim activity and an increase in the complexity of claims, and so we're seeing a higher number of conditions per claim, and so there's a number of confounding components in this.
But how does all those confounding components come together to only have an increase in payments in the next financial year? None of what you're telling me explains this $2.8 billion one-off surge in 25-26?
Senator, I think a big driver of that, as I say, is turning our attention to the aged permanent impairment claims, which do have a lag in it.
But those have been lodged over the last 5 years, and according to your dashboard data, the average time to get those ones that have been lodged, progressively over the last 5 years, is about 590 days. So we should be getting the backlog addressed progressively over this financial year and next financial year, but it's not showing in the budget.
It is to some extent, Senator, but I'm happy to take it on notice. Well, there's at least a $200 million increase
in
24-25.
That's not a...
2642 to 2834.
That's less than 200 million.
Oh, sorry, but 190.
It's about the inflation rate.
186.
That's about the inflation. That's about the inflation rate.
186.
But Senator, we need to take it on notice to get
But
you
you
more
see-
information about this.
How can you be? Sorry, I'll just rephrase it. At the end of the day, veterans aren't looking at the dashboard and looking at processing times and processing claims. What veterans need is money in their pocket. And what this data is showing is that they can expect almost no additional money in their pocket this financial year, despite all of this stuff about backlog, that it's all just going to mysteriously turn up next financial year. And how do you explain to veterans that they've got another 12 months to wait before the backlog's sorted?
Senator, it's not correct to characterise the fact of a decision at initial liability which brings both medical treatment and incapacity as nothing being paid. We've already said there's a significant delay in the timing of the permanent impairment decisions.
$2.8 billion worth of veterans.
This is the scale of the 75,000 cases that we have on hand. Yes, Senator.
But you see, what you still haven't explained to me, Mr Gifford, is if you're progressively dealing with a backlog, which goes back 5 years, you've been doing it for 2 years, why none of that's flowing this financial year? Why none of it is flowing this financial year? Why is, despite you having started on this program, and I commend you for the work, having started on the program 2 years ago, why no money is going to spit out, no additional money is going to spit out the end of the pipeline until not this financial year, but next financial year?
Senator, part of the answer to that is we're working on both ends of the pile. So we're dealing with claims, as we've given evidence already, claims that have arrived this week, as well as the old ones.
Have the assumptions in this, has this been audited? Has this assumption that none of it's going to happen this financial year and all magically happen next, has this been audited? Subject of an audit review?
As you would know, these are special appropriations, and while they are not audited, we do need to provide particular evidence to Department of Finance, and we work through that analysis on having to show the evidence to Department of Finance on, the potential dollars, the number of claims, the general thing you'd be familiar with, and the Department of Finance have to validate these before they accept them.
Well, could you on notice provide any way of providing this committee with comfort that these numbers are going to accord to reality? How you came up with the fact that pretty much the entirety of the backlog is going to be paid, none of it this financial year, but pretty much entirely next financial year. Can you explain to us on notice how on earth that happens?
Senator.
Well, I was going to indicate we will take that question on notice. The officials have given you some indication of the analytic work that they undertake as part of their jobs, but there are some limitations there may be some limitations in what can be provided because it's part of the budget process. But of course, as the official has indicated, there are robust processes involving the Department of Finance in the preparation of budget statements.
Just on these figures, without an explanation, Minister,
notice, Senator
it's a matter that I'll refer to the Auditor General. If I don't get some satisfaction on these figures, it's inexplicable on what I know. These budget numbers are inexplicable on the basis of the answers we've got and how we understand matters are being processed.
Senator, you've received some answers from officials. They've undertaken to prepare further information for you. If it's inexplicable to you, I'll leave that with you.
Well, can you explain it?
Senator, answers have been provided.
None of it explained it, Minister. Can you have a summary of how it is that $2.8 billion you have this $2.8 billion surge just in next financial year? You've been listening. Please tell me how.
Senator, you've received answers to the questions. You've been given an indication that further information will be provided.
Well, if you can't answer it,
Senator,
that says something, doesn't it?
That's your interpretation. I'm telling you that you've received answers.
Senator, if I can just add, as the Minister's confirmed, we will take it on notice and bring to you anything additional we're able to provide. You would appreciate that initial liability is determined first and needs to be determined first, and that has been the concerted focus of the department, and there's still a very strong flow of initial liability claims coming in. Initial liability claims have their own KPI under the Veteran Recognition Act, and then there is often a delay between the time when the initial liability claim has been determined and the permanent impairment claim
Secretary,
is lodged
which is why
and then determined. So there is obviously that lag between initial liability and permanent
Secretary,
impairment.
which is why I waited, I looked at the dashboard after your initial answers, and I realised the dashboard said that all of these MERCA permanent impairment claims, including the initial liability claim, on your own data is meant to be made in less than 2 years, and none of those payments seem to be being made this financial year, despite them have been lodged over the last 5 years. It doesn't make sense. That's why I went to your own data.
It's not none, Senator. It's not the large increase.
Well,
but
we can go back to whether or not
significant
it's
amounts
more or less
being
than
dispersed.
$200 million, more or less than the inflation rate, but it's bugger all of an increase, isn't it?
And I've undertaken to take it on notice, Senator, and we will get you more information.
Could I go back to the issue about the war crime, the war graves? It is a breach of the Rome Statute to desecrate war graves and graves. Has that been?
Come on,
Are you trying to minimise the destruction of Australian war graves?
Senators, come on.
Are you trying to interrupt me?
Order, senators, come on.
The desecration of war
Senators,
Is that
senators.
really what you're doing, Senator?
Thank you, everyone.
Is that really what you're
All
doing,
right,
Senator?
come on.
Well, would you let
Come on.
me
All right.
finish?
Can we just suspend? Can we just turn off the mics? Turn off the mics. Turn off the mics. All right. Hello, everyone. Back to estimates hearings. Now, Senator Shoebridge, you had a question?
Thanks. Ms McLaren.
Thank you.
You say that you heard from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission that the cemetery had been damaged in March. Have you made any inquiries of the Israeli government as to why they were, it appears from the CNN reports, putting high explosive artillery shells into the into the cemetery?
The War Cemetery in Gaza is managed on our behalf by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, so any inquiries would be appropriately undertaken by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission.
No, but these are Australian war graves. Are you saying that there were reports given by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission about damage to the cemetery? And I'll just add to you, the CNN has reported artillery strikes on the cemetery, and that you haven't made any inquiries as to what damage has happened to Australian war graves. There hasn't been any inquiries.
So a full assessment will be undertaken by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission when they're able to enter the site.
Has there been a protest made to the Israeli government about the destruction of Australian war graves and the Commonwealth War Cemetery? Has there been a protest made to the Israeli government?
We don't know at this stage what the damage within that site is. That site has, so in addition to the 259 Australian war dead, there are 3,217 Commonwealth war dead and additional from non-Commonwealth nations. So we don't know the extent of the damage at this time.
Have you said to the Israeli government, stop damaging the Commonwealth war graves? This should be protected, and has there been a protest made? Any protest at all made?
I think Ms McLaren has made clear, Senator, that any approach to the Israeli government, if any has been made, would be made by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, who oversee the maintenance of the war graves there in Gaza.
Have you asked the Commonwealth War Graves Commission if they've made a protest?
Last question.
Senator, we'll take it on notice because we would need to consult with the War Graves Commission head in Australia, who works within the department, and find out if indeed there's been any discussions with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission about the status of their inquiries with.
This is important, isn't it?
Yes, Senator, I agree, and we will take it on notice and follow up with the head of War Graves.
Secretary. Now, Senator Davey, you have the call.
Thank you. And
I'm coming to you,
on a similar vein, I also have the same concerns about the desecration of war memorials here in Australia, and if you can let us know if you intend to have make any inquiries of any of the agencies responsible for them as to what actions will be taken following that desecration, because
I think
any damage to war memorials, war graves, should be condemned, regardless of whether it is here in Australia or overseas.
Senator Davey, I think you'll know that this has been the subject of some discussion in both chambers over the course of the day, and there's been a number of comments made from government figures condemning the damage to the memorials in Canberra, and indeed more generally affirming the principle that these are places of remembrance, that they are special to Australians, to all Australians, but particularly to veterans and their families, and that there can be no support and indeed only condemnation for people who desecrate these sites. What has also been indicated is an expectation that police will investigate the offences that have taken place, and that is the appropriate way to deal with criminal offences of the kind that you are now describing.
Thank you, Minister. I have been made aware, and I'm wondering if the department is aware, that the US Department of Veterans Affairs is currently contacting veterans who have received brain injuries from blasts from their own weapons, known as blast exposure. Are you aware of that process that's underway at the moment in the US?
I don't know that officials can provide a great deal of information about activities taking place in another jurisdiction. It may be that Ms Frame has some general information, but we're obviously, I think you'd understand this, Senator Davey, we can't answer questions about things being undertaken in the United States.
I'm not asking so much about what the US is doing, but if you're aware of the issue and whether a similar issue or the same issue is being investigated here in Australia. That's where I'm getting to.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I am aware of the issue, and I have had some conversations with people in Australia who have raised the issue.
Will Australia be conducting... I'm of the understanding that in the US they're going to run some studies of blast exposure on their veterans. Is our department looking to undertake similar studies of our veterans, or have we had any similar scale of reports of blast exposure?
Senator, I'd need to take that on notice. So I will come back to you if I can find out anything. As I said, there have been discussions about it. I would also respond to your first question. We do have not regular conversations, but we do have conversations with US Veterans Affairs and UK and Canada and New Zealand. So I don't think I've met with the head of Veterans Affairs in the US for maybe 6 months or so, but we do share medical information, and at that point she was sharing some information and there was a follow-up discussion with our Chief Health Officer about some exposures in Iraq and Afghanistan and some work that they had done there. So there are those conversations, and there's certainly the potential for us to talk to them and any other colleagues about studies, which obviously would, be relevant to Australian considerations, and it may be that it would need to be medical researchers making a determination as to whether we needed to replicate or do our own studies, or whether there was evidence sufficient from overseas for us to start progressing something. But if you would allow me to take it on notice, Senator, I will come back to you with more information.
So, just for my own clarity, in your conversations with the US, you have been made aware that they are looking at blast exposure?
No, as I said, sorry, Senator, the last conversation I had, we were talking about air contamination, I think, but we do have those conversations and there are those connections. And I met with a former Surgeon General. Actually, when I was on a personal holiday, I met with him and had a conversation, and we've kept up that contact as well. So there are those discussions that occur, and I can follow up now specifically on blast injuries, and as my awareness related to having some discussions about that in an Australian context.
Okay, so it's on your radar, and you'll follow up on notice
I will.
with
Senator,
more detail.
Yep.
It may be, Senator Davey, that in the first instance these questions might be better directed to the ADF. Whilst we will of course take this on notice, it's obviously an area where it may be that Defence has information they can provide to you.
Okay, In the US context, it's being investigated by Veterans Affairs, I guess, it's something that they've been made aware of, and they're now finding out what portion of the veterans community have actually been impacted, rather than currently serving members. I want to come back to the working through the backlog, and I note in your opening statement you are very proud you 90% of the backlog you inherited has now been. When you say finalised, do you mean moved off the backlog list into now being processed, or do you mean finalised, they're off the backlog list, they've been processed and they've had a determination?
Yes, thank you, Senator. In my opening statement, I referred specifically to the Royal Commission backlog, which was a claims allocation backlog. So, as I said earlier, I think it was a response to Senator O'Neill, there were over 44,000 claims that the Royal Commission identified that hadn't been allocated to anyone. And as I said, there were many tens of thousands additional that had been allocated to someone but had not been determined. So there were two backlogs in effect, and the Royal Commission initially focused on the claims allocation backlog and said, you've got these 44,000 claims that haven't even been looked at. You need to have them allocated to someone by the end of March 2024. And by the end of February 2024, DVA was able to report that we had done that and realised the Royal Commission's requirement to have them allocated to someone by the end of March. As I said, we got that a month ahead of schedule. But what I also added that you referred to was that of that number in the Royal Commission backlog at that point in time, over 90% of those claims, I think it's now 93.5% or something like that, have been determined. So they've actually been that final decision made, money out the door, further to Senator Shoebridge's questions earlier. So that's the Royal Commission backlog specifically, that just over 93% of those have been determined, as well as obviously needing to be allocated in line with the Royal Commission's deadline, but that's additional step being realised.
So that 41,800 in your opening statement has now 93% of it has come off the sort of out of the inbox, has been allocated and has been processed and determined.
Correct,
93%.
That's correct, yes.
So further in your opening statement, as at 31st of May 2024, 73,204 claims being actively processed. So they've come into the inbox and have been allocated?
Almost all of them have been allocated, Senator. So 73,204 claims are allocated. And I said at that point, 31 May, there are 3,003 exactly, that were awaiting allocation, because we have a key performance indicator that we try to meet, which is to have them allocated within 14 days. So that the 3,000, you can assume that most or all of them have arrived in the department in the last 14 days and they are awaiting allocation, and the 73,000 have been allocated. How are we tracking towards that 14-day KPI? It's very strong on initial liability, Senator, so initial liability claims are being allocated very quickly. The permanent impairment claims are taking some additional time to allocate. Some of them are being allocated within the 14 days. I don't have the exact figures, I'm sorry, I have to take that on notice. Not all of them, though, are being allocated within the 14-day aspiration. You've went on to say that in May you received 9,898 claims, so that would be new claims, I'm interpreting? That's right, Senator, yes. And you made a record of 9,976 determinations, so that's
finalisation. So
Yes.
My simple maths, that's a net, positive net, to credit to you, of 78 per month.
Yes, Senator.
Or for that month. But my concern is, at that rate, for the 73,204 being processed, it will take 938 months to finalise that amount of claims that you have on your books. I'm
Yes.
a little bit concerned that 78 a month net, because, I mean, as you keep getting new claims in...
At record rates, in fact, Senator.
It's like the gift that keeps on giving. It's like painting the Harbour Bridge. You keep doing it and you've got to start again.
I
but
agree.
at the rate of 78 per month, even though it's a positive, and I credit to you for putting systems in place where you're getting things finalised, 938 months is 78 years to finalise the 73,000 that you've got on the books. I'm just...
Yes, Senator, I can provide some information about that. I agree that you might have that concern, but that's not actually the reality. There's a significant number of the 73,000, or it's around that number, which we call total claims on hand. That's total claims on hand, and what we call the stock, basically, the number that are in DVA to be determined. That's initial liability, that's permanent impairment, that's everything together, and we call that the stock. There would be a very significant number of that, Senator, probably about half. I can get a correction if any of my colleagues can correct me, but there would be a very significant number of that would be a business as usual level that the department will always retain, that will still be within the KPI objectives and targets of the Veteran Recognition Act as well. So there's probably between 30 and 40,000 of those claims that in a department that didn't have any backlogs, you would still have those kinds of numbers, and they would be being processed according to the timeframes of 100 days for processing initial liability, and then the permanent impairment claims that are lodged subsequent to that. So just to immediately correct that whole number are a number that need to be addressed each month. There would always be that resting stock level that would be quite high, Senator. So that accounts for a quite significant number. We've done in the demand-driven funding model that Ms Blewett referred to earlier, there's been quite detailed modelling about our processing speed and how many what staff numbers we would need to continue to process those claims and to realise that level of having a healthy and a stock of claims that are within the KPI objective. So we have that modelling available, and we've been funded at that level, and the government's made a commitment to the demand-driven funding model. There's also a number of business improvements and efficiencies that are constantly being applied to the process that will continue to increase the number of claims that we're able to determine. Including bringing new staff on as well. We've obviously got authority now to bring on additional staff. We had 49 staff start in our Melbourne office yesterday, and there will be additional staff coming online in Brisbane and Sydney and Perth, as I understand it. So, Senator, there's a lot of factors affecting that determination rate, so we are anticipating that will continue to increase. But I would mention, Senator, that something that is affecting us at the moment definitely is that the claims are coming in at a very high rate. So not only are initial liability claims coming in at a higher rate than we've seen, they're also converting to permanent impairment claims at a very high rate as well. So obviously, each initial liability claim, once determined and the liabilities accepted, can manifest in permanent impairment claims under different legislation. So both of those rates of claims, Senator, are increasing, and that is something that we are having to factor into our numbers, and something that is affecting. When you look at that high number of claims received in May, they are not claim levels that we've typically seen, Senator.
I have questions about the way you report your processing of claims, because what you report publicly on your website doesn't match what is in the budget statements. So, for example, War Widow claims, you report publicly on your website how many have been waiting for 0 to 100 days, 100 to and 1 to 200 days, and so on. But in the PBS measure on page 32, it says you report on the percentage of claims processed within 30 days. Is there a reason for the two different ones? Is your KPI 30 days, but you publicly report 100 days, or?
It's in the portfolio budget statements, Minister, that's our KPIs with.
Right.
Yes, they are our formal KPIs on the website. We are including additional information to provide additional transparency.
Why don't you report on your KPI on the website? So why don't you report on the website the timeliness and the percentage of claims that you've actually met your own KPI, which is 30 days? And I know there are different KPIs for different
They're all
payments.
different, Senator, yes.
Yes, but a lot of people, and particularly veterans, would be looking, going, are they meeting their KPIs? Or, you know, when you report on how many claims you've processed within 100 days, well, as far as we're aware, 98% of them could be beyond your KPI. So you're failing on your KPI measure, but you are meeting 98% of claims within 100 days. But if you've got a KPI of 30 days, why don't you report against the 30 days?
Senator, I think you'll find we're actually reporting a lot more on the website, making a lot more information than a single KPI available to the veteran community, so that they've got greater transparency and visibility of the department's performance across a range of payment types and claims.
Senator, sorry, could I just add, I know that you acknowledge there are different KPIs. Just for the record, page 32, that is program 1.3, the assistance to defence, widows and dependents. 1.6, which is more around the claims that I think you're talking about. If you refer to page 35, that gives you a different KPI, so that will refer to 100 days under DIRCA and 100 days, etc. I know you recognised there were different KPIs, but I just wanted to make sure that we're clear for the record that page 32 was talking about a different program, that's all.
Right. And I just want to have a look at processing comparisons, because a lot has been made about under the coalition how many the increasing backlog and the processing KPIs that were being met. But when we have a look at and compare the PBS from 22-23, which was, yes, it was 22-23 after the election, but it was based on statistics that were undertaken during the coalition government, and then the PBS of 24-25, at that point in time, when we did this review, it looked like a lot of the statistics were actually lower. So like timeliness, the percentage of delivery assistance to defence widowers and their dependents, the timeliness in 22-23 processed within 30 days was 52%, and at that time 24-25 was only 28%. Have you got updated figures for those that we can run through, or?
Sorry, Senator. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, though, Senator Perry, I need to move the call around because I've given you a 20-minute block. Maybe we'll come back. Okay. Is that all right? I'm not sure if that's an easy answer, but I'm going to leave it to the Secretary to provide a response.
Chair, I was just going to say we won't have the current financial year numbers for a little bit longer yet. It's the is it the 2nd today? So they will be in our annual report, but we don't have those numbers, which will be around September, Senator.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
So I'll move on when I get the call back.
I'm going to hand the call over to Senator Lamb for about 10 minutes, and then Senator Shoebridge for 10 minutes, and then whatever time we have left, Senator Davey, that'll be your time. Thanks. And maybe a few minutes for Senator Darman, who I'm sure has a few questions. All right, Senator Lambie.
Thank you. I was just wondering, what is the time period from a claim being assigned to a claim support officer to delegates under Merkel liability and the permanent impairment, and for DERCA liability and permanent impairment for determination?
I'll have to take that on notice, Senator.
What guarantee can you give me that the claims backlog haven't just moved from a pile where they were waiting to be assigned to a new pile held by the claim support officers, still waiting to be assigned to delegates who actually make the decisions?
I think the numbers that I've shared tonight, Senator, demonstrate that there are record levels or numbers of decisions being made, and that there are a very small number of claims, I said 3,003, that are not allocated and are not subject to processing. So I think the numbers demonstrate that it's not just sitting in a different pile with no activity occurring around it.
Do you think you could take on notice to provide me the average time it's taking to go from a claim support officer and being assigned to delegates who actually make the decisions?
I can certainly take that on notice, Senator. I would point out some claims go directly to delegates, so I'll take that on notice and we'll provide you that specific information.
Can you... Yep, that's it. Do you know what the error rates are on Merkel liability and permanent impairment when there are reconsideration requests?
I will need to take it on notice, Senator, to get you the exact error rates. I know they have not moved very much, but I will take it on notice and get you the exact numbers, Senator.
Thank you. Could you tell me what the error rates are for DERCA liability and permanent impairment?
I'm just seeing if anyone has those numbers, Senator, so we don't have to take them on notice for you. It may be that Ms Cole has those numbers.
Natasha Cole, First Assistant Secretary, Client Benefits Division, Senator. Were you actually asking about quality assurance rates, or were you asking about internal and external review rates?
Oh, you can give me both. That'll be great. Thank you.
So we don't have annual... we do our quality assurance rates on an annual basis.
Right.
So we don't have this year's figures yet on an annual basis, but we should be able to give those to you on notice shortly.
Okay, and the other one?
The review rates have stayed relatively consistent in the sense of the percentage of claims which go through to an internal review and then on to the VRB. What I mean by that is we are doing more claims, but the rate of review has stayed pretty much at the same rate over the last 12 to 24 months, despite the fact that we're making many more decisions than we did previously. At the moment, we had 2,008, in July 2023, we had 2,884 reviews on hand, which compared to 2,231 in July 2022. In 23-24, as of March 24, we had a total of 3,543 reviews on hand. So there's an absolute increase in the number, but not the percentage, in the sense of we're still sitting at around 2.5 to 2.6% of decisions made going through to internal and external review.
Okay. Can you tell me how many decisions have been varied or changed by the Veterans Review Board from Mercer claims?
We have to get those for Mercer clients. I probably don't have that. Oh, do I have that?
2022-23.
Yep. Do you want to? So, Mercer claims, there were 16.7% of the decisions which went through. Is that the VRB for sure? Yeah. Varied the original decision.
Right. I just want to find out about the 500 new staff that were announced in the 22-23 budget. Are they still employed in the department?
Well, not exactly, Senator. What I mean to say is we have those positions. The vast majority of those staff have remained with us, but there is the normal turnover over that period of 2 years.
So how many? What does that look like? How many do we have?
So we still hold 500 permanent staff.
That's correct, Senator. There's still the net additional 500 staff, and we've received funding for a further additional permanent staff in the most recent budget.
Okay, so that was 141.
Yes, correct.
Staff?
That's right, Senator.
Okay, so we haven't been able to fill those positions.
Oh, we've only just received the funding for them, so we're actively filling those positions now, Senator.
Long day. Can you give me a breakdown of how many are working on full-time, part-time and casual basis?
I will see if we have that. I think we'll have to take that on notice for you, Senator.
On notice, Senator.
Yeah.
Can you tell me how many claims support officers are currently employed by the department?
We will have a breakdown of the workforce in our Client Benefits Division.
Yes, Senator, I can say at May 2024, of claims support officers, there were 302.
Sorry?
302 in May 2024.
Okay, and what does their workload look like?
In the sense of, Senator? What do they do? What is their duties?
Okay, so how many claims, on average, how many claims do they have each sitting on their desks?
So they have, we've got that.
Senator, their average workload is around 52.
Yep.
Okay, 52. That'd be 52 folders, not 52 claims. So you've got 52 different personnel, and is that correct? 52.
52 claims.
Claims, Senator.
Claims, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not 52 different people with a multitude of claims in each of those folders.
That's correct. So there will be 52 claims. There may be 2 of those 52 which belong to the same veteran, for example. So if they lodged a claim, in week 1 and then another one in week 2, we will give those 2 claims to the same claim support officer or the same delegate as it rolls through to minimise the number of people that the delegate has to speak to. The veteran has to speak to.
Okay, do you know if there's been any referrals to investigative bodies from the Royal Commission made in respect to DVA or any of the contractors that have been used in the past?
Not that I'm aware. Sorry, Senator, are you asking, have the Royal Commission referred any?
Yeah, have the Royal Commission. You may not know, but
no,
I'm just
not
wondering
aware,
if you do.
Senator. I'm not aware. Yep.
Okay. Could you please let me know in the financial years of 2021-22 and 22-23 how many complaints were resolved by confidentiality settlements, and whether or not you can give me the value of each of those confidentiality settlements?
I'll take that on notice, Senator.
Okay. I've got nothing left.
All good.
Just pass it on.
You're right?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good on you, mate. All right. Senator Shoebridge, I'll give you the call for the next 10 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. When I look at page 31 of the budget papers, and it talks about making determinations, percentage of claims processed within 100 days. Process means having been received, having been allocated and decided.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes, Senator.
And I commend the ambition here to have greater than half of all claims processed within 100 days in this financial year. And I assume that's across the board. Is that what page 31's referencing?
I'm just confirming, Senator. 31, is that the disability support?
Veterans disability support?
Yes,
yeah.
Senator.
That's across the portfolio.
It'll be across that outcome, that particular program. Yes, yes.
So then when I have a look at the most recent data for May, for example, of this year, far from going up, things have got dramatically worse. The time taken to allocate, just to allocate an a MERCA initial liability claim, almost doubled between April 24 and May 24, from 140 days to 263 days. It got dramatically worse in May.
Sorry, Senator, can you just repeat that? At the time taken to allocate a MERCA IL claim, to allocate.
Allocate it? I'm going off your data. I'm reading straight off your website. It went from 140 days in April 24 to 263 days in May 24. The time to allocate a DIRCA initial liability claim went from 204 days in April 24 to 255 days in May 24. So I'm reading directly from
Senator, I'll get assistance from my colleagues if I can, but my initial reaction now on hearing those numbers is that it reflects us processing older claims, that there is in fact more activity, and we are picking up older claims that have been sitting there for a long period of time, such that when a DIRCA claim, for example, that has been unallocated for 400, 500 days is allocated, it then affects the average, and the time taken to process, or time taken to allocate, increases in the short term as an increasing number of those older claims are subject to allocation.
Well, while you're answering that, can you then explain why the processing of initial liability claims also got worse?
For the same reason, Senator. For the same reason. It's the. I'm going to ask my colleagues to provide any additional information if they can, but it's the effect of increased processing activity on claims that have been sitting in a backlog for a long period of time, and as they are pulled out of the backlog and either allocated or determined, they affect those averages because they bring all those days that they were awaiting that
Well, Secretary,
allocation.
if that's the case, it's just totally out of whack for what's been happening for the other 12 months that are allocated here. Totally out of whack. Something random happened, if that's your answer, in May, but maybe there is something random that happened in May.
Senator, it wasn't random. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to ensure that some of those oldest, most difficult claims were being dealt with in May, and we also did the same in June, so that we could make sure that we were getting as close, essentially moving the entire caseload the right way. So there was a long tail, and we deliberately addressed that tail in May and in June.
So what was the time taken to allocate in June?
I don't have those figures here.
We don't have those figures. They'll be released on the 14th or 15th of June, of July.
All right, and they're part of that tranche of questions that are going to be answered?
Yeah, they'll be published on the website.
For all of to make this quick, for all of the June data that is otherwise published on the, normally published in the statistics table, could you just update that for us for the 15th of July?
So we will be doing that ordinarily anyway, but we will provide that to you on notice if you wish, Senator.
Secretary, there was a decision made to recruit foreign nationals to join the ADF. Has there been any work done as to how on earth Veteran Affairs will be supporting foreign nationals if they return to the United States, if they return to Canada, if they return to the United Kingdom? Has there been any work done on what that would cost and how it would be done?
Not at this stage, Senator.
Minister, don't you think you should have done that before you make a decision to recruit foreign nationals? Work out how you could support them if they're injured veterans?
Can I just qualify before you go to this, Minister, Senate? It may be that there's been work done in defence, but no work in Veterans Affairs that I'm aware of.
You deal with veterans, don't you?
I do, Senator, but there may have been
but I don't know about the
Did
Department
they
of
ask you
Defence.
for any information about this?
If I may, Senator, you'll recall, and we don't have defence officials with us here
Because
today.
they don't do veterans.
But may I finish
They
my
don't do
answer?
veterans.
May I finish my answer?
If it relates to veterans.
We don't have defence officials here. Chair.
I know. Just, we're going to let the Minister answer. Minister.
What I'm trying to explain to you, Senator, is that we don't have the defence officials here today, but you'll recall that the evidence when we canvassed the question around the changes in recruitment practices at the last hearings, it involved the questions around citizenship as being a feature of being recruited into the ADF. And so in the absence of defence officials, it's difficult for these officials to provide you with answers, but they need to become citizens after 90 days of service, so they wouldn't be different to any of the other veterans who've served in the ADF.
Secretary, so to be clear, you've not been asked to provide any advice to the government about how
citizens are to be provided services.
Could you let me finish my question, Minister? So, Secretary, to be clear, you've not been asked for any advice at all from government about how veterans who have been recruited from overseas, who may well retain their Canadian, US, UK citizenship, how on earth they would be supported by Veteran Affairs if they returned to their home country at the end of serving with the Australian military. You haven't been asked for any advice at all about that, let alone any costings?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator. I take it on notice. I need to confirm.
Do you accept that trying to support a veteran in the United States would be a difficult and complex task? Much more difficult and complex than trying to support a veteran in Australia?
I'd need to understand more about
it's a long way
the measure,
away.
Senator. And the Minister has explained that the people who would become Australian citizens. So
Correct.
from the Department of Veterans Affairs perspective, we would be approaching them as per our standard DVA entitlements.
But they've been recruited from overseas. They'll probably retain US citizenship, retain Canadian citizenship, retain the UK citizenship. That's not required to surrender that to become an Australian citizen. Is it seriously the case that no one from Defence has reached out to Veteran Affairs and say, how on earth would we support an injured veteran who returns to the United States? No one's even asked that question of you.
I think, Senator, there are existing protocols for travelling or living overseas. Ms Frame has undertaken to come back to you with further information on notice.
No, she hasn't.
My apologies, I had understood that she had.
Yes, Senator, I said I was going to confirm if there had been any discussions in the department.
So the US troops who are currently operating in the ADF, do they have an entitlement to compensation under the Mercer Act?
I need to take that on notice, Senator. I'm not aware that it's come up.
So
that case has arisen is what I mean, Senator.
Well, I'll ask the same of the UK and any foreign military officer, any foreign member of the military who's serving with the ADF. Do they have access to Mercer?
Senator, in general, the entitlements attached to service in the Australian Defence Force, but we'll need to come back to you with the notice on how that applies to an officer of another country that might be seconded, for want of a better word.
Just clarifying, I'm sorry, it's directly relevant because I think this is a really important line of questioning. We do already have some foreign nationals serving or who have served as members of the ADF. How are they treated if they return to their alternate country of citizenship when they leave the ADF and they might end up with a claim against Mercer or Derker?
Senator, that's the point we've undertaken to answer on notice, because there would be a distinction between serving as a foreign military member embedded in the ADF versus someone who's serving as a member of the ADF in terms of the legislative entitlement.
Mm-hmm. So, Ms Frame, as I understand it, you've taken on notice whether or not there have been any approaches made.
Yes, Senator.
And will you take on notice whether or not any costings have been sought? And if so, have any costings been provided?
Yes, Senator.
But to the best of your knowledge, sitting there now, none of that has occurred.
Well, it's been taken on notice, Senator.
Well, Ms Frame, you earlier answered...
It's been taken on notice, Senator.
Ms Frame, you earlier answered that you're unaware of any. I'm assuming you're not changing that evidence.
I'm not changing that evidence, Senator. I'm just saying that I don't know what discussions might have occurred in the department.
But you're the Secretary.
But yes, I am the Secretary, but discussions do occur in the department that...
at a much lower level,
I'm
perhaps.
Not. Correct.
All right. Now, Senator Davey.
Yes,
I'm going to go.
very much.
Thank you all.
I just want to come back to the letter from Senator Chandler. We covered off probably the second page. On the first page of the letter, there was a request for processing, data about processing for each month. Since and including April 2022, for the total number of claims being processed, the age distribution based on timeliness, both actual and percentage, as recent as you possibly have. Do you have that information here?
I don't have that information in front of me at the moment, but we can.
But you'll take it on notice.
Can take it on notice and provide the tables.
So, again, I won't harp on it, but I echo Senator Reynolds' concerns. So I want to come to, and I will just say that in other committees I'm in, when we write these letters, even though the expectation is to have a discussion, one of the reasons for the letters is so that that sort of data, statistical data information is in a format that can be tabled and that can help guide the discussion. But I accept you'll take it on notice.
Senator Davey, if I may, as I recall this from opposition, the way that this was navigated in some other committees was through a discussion between the committee and the minister, and a discussion was sort of arrived at about the kind of information that was reasonable and could reasonably support committee examination of matters that routinely arose. And it may be that Minister Keogh would be open to an approach from the committee about some kinds of data that could be regularly provided. I noted the earlier response from Ms Frame that much of this is available on a website was met with some sarcasm. But actually, in this particular example, the department is making great efforts to provide a measure of transparency about how claims handling is occurring, and there is a lot of data on the website, and it's been the subject of a lot of discussion in this committee over time. In relation to the second bundle of questions asked by Senator Chandler, they effectively are really detailed written questions on notice,
yes.
Which were being lodged before the hearing rather than after the hearing. There really isn't a provision in the standing orders for requests of this kind. We're happy to try and accommodate reasonable requests. In the past, committees have requested that ministers and officials come prepared for a detailed discussion on certain themes or topics, and that's been a reasonable request that people have been willing to accommodate. I'm not sure that asking that written questions and answers be turned around with 7 days' notice outside of the ordinary processes of the standing orders is something that is reasonable for the committee to ask. But, you know, this could be a matter of discussion if people wish to approach it in a different way.
And I appreciate that, Minister. I would just say that for this department, for this agency, processing times and how it's reported has been a key issue since even prior to the commencement of the Royal Commission, increasingly so with the focus of the Royal Commission on ensuring we get the backlog details. It is, you could say it's the bread and butter of this agency, and it is something that I would expect this agency is prepared to be able to go, yes, we've got this data, more than just an opening statement, but look at how good our data has been, say, over the last 12 months, and then, you know, we would build that ongoing view. But
I mean, you can see a lot of that on the website. I'm looking at it right now.
Yes, but we wanted a monthly breakdown as well. So, and that's why we provided the notice. And given that it is on the website, extracting it off the website and getting the monthly breakdown, I would not have thought would have been such a huge ask, since obviously the data is collected within the agency.
Yeah, I mean, just for clarity, the data that is presently provided on the website does include a monthly breakdown for essentially the current financial year. It also then includes annualised data for each of the 3 preceding financial years. I understand that Senator Chandler is asking for an additional level of detail, and what I have already indicated through the chair to the committee at large and to you, Senator Davey, is it may be that Minister Keogh is open to a discussion about what information might be reasonably provided to the committee on a regular basis in addition to what's here.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Minister. I want to come now to the consolidation, streamlining, however we describe it, of the 3 acts, the Mercer, Durker and VEA. The draft was released in February, ongoing consultation. Am I right in that it is almost... Are we ready to rumble? Is it?
Very soon, Senator. Very soon.
Actually,
Mr Brown has an update.
While we've been here, Senator, the daily orders for tomorrow have been circulated and is scheduled for introduction tomorrow.
Introduction tomorrow,
yep.
Which is very, very good news. Given that it is up for introduction tomorrow, can you give us a high-level understanding of what... I know it was the intent, the recommendation of the Royal Commission was to bring those 3 acts under one. So does that mean that if I'm on Mercer, Durker or VEA, once it's passed and finalised, I'll come under a new act? Or how's it going to apply to veterans who are currently on a payment?
So I anticipate that the final bill that will be introduced tomorrow will be largely similar. It will be altered in relation to feedback that we did receive during the consultation process on the exposure draft bill, but it will be largely similar to the exposure draft bill that was released for consultation on the 28th of February. It's not a new piece of legislation, Senator. It amends our 3 primary acts, the ones that you previously named. The primary purpose of the bill will be to move away from what we call a date of injury approach, where which of the 3 acts that applies to your particular claimed injury, disease or death is determined by the service that relates to that claimed injury, disease or death. And there is significant complexity in that arrangement, depending on the nature of a veteran's service. And it will move to an arrangement where from 1 July, on or after 1 July 2026, any claim lodged will be dealt with under the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Act. Any benefit that you are receiving, particularly under the Veterans Entitlements Act, prior to that date you will retain, won't be touched by either the commencement of the new legislative arrangements or the lodgement of a subsequent claim after 1 July 2026. So we've referred to that in the consultation period as grandparenting those arrangements. There are some beneficial exceptions to those grandparenting arrangements. For example, one which has been adjusted, but the government announced it on budget night because it was reflected in the $222 million of increased compensation and healthcare and support going out to veterans and their families. But one exception to that is that incapacity payment recipients under the DIRCA will transfer automatically to receive their incapacity payments under the MERCA from 1 July 2026. That will result in an increase to incapacity payments in the vast majority of cases for those DIRCA recipients. There's a 5% purely notional superannuation deduction that's made from those incapacity payments under the DIRCA. That is not made under the MERCA, so a 5% increase. And there's, for former full-time serving members, there's a remuneration loading allowance, which is added on top of incapacity payments under the MERCA, which is not available under the DIRCA. So, and permanent impairment payments under the DIRCA are lump sums. Obviously, they're not being affected by the changes. If you've previously received a lump sum, you
don't have to pay
that.
it back and go on to it.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I'll come to the 222 million, but so given that we're grandfathering, is this going to mean that we're going from 3 acts that people can be receiving a payment under to almost to 4 because we're grandfathering? So you could be getting a MERCA payment, you could be getting a DIRCA payment, and you could come in under the new, you could put in a new claim under the Military Rehabilitation Compensation Act, the new version, and get payments under that. I thought the intention was to streamline.
No, I wouldn't categorise it like that at all, Senator. The only thing, as I say, in terms of grandparenting is that a veteran might be getting under the VEA a rate of disability compensation payment at the general rate. So if they're getting 40% of the general rate, after 1 July 2026 they may put in a new claim and that will be determined under the MERCA. That opens up some compensation options that they don't have under the VEA. They'll retain that VEA payment, but they'll get a top-up under the MERCA, and that's really the only circumstance where we might be creating a new split in terms of the payments that they're receiving under the various acts. But that just opens up flexibility in terms of the way that they receive compensation payments. There shouldn't be any complexity for the veteran in that. And
what about for the department?
It would be much easier for the department because all claims will be under the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Act. Those disability compensation payments,
claims.
Yeah, those disability compensation payments are largely set and forget. They are indexed every 20 March and 20 September, but there's no ongoing maintenance that we need to do apart from those indexation arrangements, which are automated in the system. So there's no administrative complexity in that at all.
Okay. Is there a reason, if it's being introduced tomorrow, which is good news, is there a reason why we couldn't meet the recommended deadline of the Royal Commission of implementation by 1 July 2025? Why are we waiting an extra year? Because potentially, I mean, we haven't seen the legislation yet, but if it's being introduced tomorrow, you would hope that it's dealt with by the two chambers. I don't want to preempt, but I'm wondering why there's an 18-month delay.
So that's obviously a decision that's been taken, Senator, by government, but the reasoning behind it is that under the MERCA, claim outcomes will be different to what they are under the current system, and we need to give veterans, the main driver behind that 1 July 2026 commencement date is to give veterans the time to understand how those outcomes might be different, because there will be veterans that may want to have claims lodged before that cut-over date for a variety of reasons. We need to have time to have advocates understand the changes so that they can support veterans through that transitional period. And there is some implementation effort, as Senator Shoebridge alluded to earlier, required for us. Even though it is moving to an existing act, there is some implementation effort that's required to do in that time frame. Should point out as well that we have had indications from the Royal Commission that they think that 1 July 2026 commencement date is reasonable in their view.
So with the 222 million for each year over the forward estimates that was allocated in the budget to harmonise the compensation and rehabilitation legislation, have you got a breakdown of what exactly that funding is for? Is it for administration, consultation, drafting of the bill, or is it all going to veterans?
There was as I said before, Senator, in my EFA, there was $40 million for departmental funding. That was for implementation effort. The $222 million is administered dollars, so that's program money going out the door to veterans and their families in terms of increased compensation and healthcare.
So all of the $222 million is for veterans' compensation payments?
Yes, Senator, that's the financial implications of the changes that come into effect on 1 July 26.
Okay.
And that's all in payments.
Thank you.
That's good for me.
Now, Comrade, have you got any questions there before we knock off tonight, Senator Darwin? Just any clarifying?
Well, maybe given it's my first, I should
I know, welcome.
get my name on the transcript. Just following on from Senator Davey on the harmonisation, can you just confirm, will there be any cuts to what veterans receive in terms of compensation services or support?
No, Senator, as Mr Brown's described, existing benefits and payments will be continued and indexed under the current legislation, and then their future claims will be dealt with under the MERCA. So there's no reduction, very deliberately maintaining existing benefits and then moving to the new scheme.
Okay. Thank you. And last question, noting that the introduction of the legislation is imminent, what consultation has been undertaken to ensure that this legislation will meet the needs of veterans and their families?
Now, there's really been 3 rounds of consultation, Senator. The first was towards the end of the calendar year in 2022, which was really an initial survey because the Royal Commission's interim report referred back to some Productivity Commission recommendations. There was a refresh, I guess, on community view around those recommendations. But the 2 major pieces of consultation, the first started on a pathway for reform in February 2023 and ran until May 2023. And that was on a pathway that articulated that the vision was to move to that single ongoing act arrangement, which was MERCA from 1 July from an unspecified date at that point in time. Then on the 28th of February, the Minister released an exposure draft, and we had specific consultation on that exposure draft up to the 28th of May. That consultation, 28th of April, Senator. That consultation involved 26 face-to-face meetings with around over 219, around 219 people attending those face-to-face engagements. We ran 3 webinars with, again, over 200 people logging on to be involved in that, and 313 submissions were received as part of that consultation on the exposure draft.
Thank you.
Senator, I might just add one of the documents that will be released consistent with what we did in relation to the first process Mr Brown referred to. Is there's a document recording the outcomes of that consultation process to support the Parliament's consideration of the bill.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Excellent question, Senator Darwin. We'll have to get you back here next round of estimates, I reckon.
Can't wait.
Now, on that note, can I say thank you very much to the department. It concludes today's proceedings. It is requested that senators submit any written questions or notice by the 9th of July this year, and the committee has set the 12th of August of this year as the date for the return of any answers to questions taken on notice. Thanks to Minister McAllister, the Secretary of the Department, and your officers of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Thanks to Hansard Broadcasting and the Secretariat for tonight. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to declare the hearing adjourned. Thanks, everyone.